All right, Chris, World's End is over, and this was the follow-up show, and it was seen on, I was going to say HBO Max. We got to drop the HBO part. It was seen on Max. I don't think there's like one single obvious headline coming out of this. They're building up to a few things here. But I want to bring up the follow-up to the Continental Classic. I was hoping for them to underline and emphasize more what a big deal all the TV the last month has been centered around. And we saw Okada at the very beginning walking with the belt, so that's good. They acknowledged it. And then they did a video package, not really talking about the drama at the pay-per-view leading to who won, but more the fallout with Kenny Omega. I thought they turned the page too quickly. I think one of the big things that makes a tournament that's annual feel like a big deal is treating the tournament right after it happens like it was a really big deal. That actually struck me more than just about anything on this show. I wanted them to celebrate that tournament and to talk about the pay-per-view happenings. And really, Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher just practically didn't exist, and they were semifinalists. Did that cross your mind watching it, or is it striking you now? Yeah, they really did make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, I think the key for a tournament like this is to have it be important over time. I mean, to me, the whole thing is weird that they're somehow adding Okada's win to the G1 wins. But for the reason why the G1 is important is because they talk about it every year. The winners go on, their feuds that develop out of it. And I think that they mentioned that, Okada won at the beginning because I feel like they had to, but they didn't really emphasize what happened. It's more like, oh, he's going to wrestle Kenny Omega, as opposed to how that, like, Kenny Omega could have come back even if he had lost. The fact that he won was cool, but it doesn't really matter in their feud when you're focusing on something that happened 6 years ago. They should have highlighted at some point that Ospreay and Fletcher, even though they have this rivalry, are both upset that they didn't win the Continental Classic, because that's why they're in the tournament in the first place. And they had a lot of promos from people from World's End. It would have been helpful for Kyle Fletcher to have cut a promo that said, Okada, not only, you cost me, my opportunity to win this prestigious tournament. And it seems that, and this happened last year with the Continental Classic, it is good for AEW booking, and it allows them to kind of string together things for shows.
Yeah.
Over the course of a few weeks, but then once it's over, it's like, well, we did that, so we'll catch up again on it next year. But there's no kind of continuity going forward to what did the last 3, 4, 5 weeks mean.
Yeah. This is a week to do it. I mean, it's not it's not a blockbuster show. They're up against college football games and people celebrating New Year's and stuff like that. But even if it was, if you want people to care about what the outcome, and you want people to care next year, I would have led with that. They don't. Tony Khan doesn't approach, and a lot of wrestling promoters that honestly happen over the years, they approach what they do not through the lens of how journalists traditionally over the decades have. I know it's a little different now because it's just pump out a bunch of SEO garbage headlines with, deceptive headlines and earn your money and keep your editor happy. That's a lot of journalism these days, even in reputable places. But it used to be that editors would think, what should our headline be? What should be the first thing people see on the newsstand and in the news box and on the shelf at the grocery store? What's the top story? And I think that approach works for pro wrestling. The top story should be Moxley retains a title, but that wasn't a highly anticipated match with 3 challengers who, did they even deserve the title shot? The big thing that happened was the culmination of this month-plus long tournament. And to me, that's the headline. And you emphasize it, and you lead with that, and you focus on it. And they didn't. I'm not going to belabor that point, but I wanted to make that point at the top of the show because I feel strongly about it. I really think AEW needs to pick out what the biggest story is and not just put in the rearview mirror something that they just spent over a month telling people is the most important thing that happens every year. And what really matters is, I guess, Kenny Omega is back. So anyway, I was bummed out about that. It's not enough. I mean, they addressed it. It's not that like they completely ignored it, but yeah, I don't think that was great. Let's talk about the build to the gauntlet match it's in 2 weeks, right? It's the
title
match. Yeah. What's the gimmick show? Mayhem?
Maximum Carnage.
Maximum Carnage. Yes. Mayhem. Yeah. It's not Mayhem. So they're building around that. And I thought they did a nice job explaining, the somewhat convoluted rules, which is if the match ends before you get to enter it, you don't get to be in it. I really enjoyed Tony Schiavone catching himself and saying the only position that guarantees you can win the match is number 1. And then like a second later he goes, well, number 2 too, because you got to have someone to wrestle and beat. That was amusing. But they threw some names out there. Jay White paid lip service to it. Hobbs won a squash and they said he's in it. So in terms of setting the stage for 2025 and moving forward, between that, MJF's promo, hyping Kenny Omega's return, a couple other things on the show, I thought like that was the positive here. Is it did feel like a sort of fresh start. I can't call it fresh when you still got Adam Cole standing in the ring calling himself part of Undisputed Kingdom. That's still not fresh and never will be. But there was a decent amount here that I thought said, all right, the 2024 is over. Here, now we're setting the stage for what's going forward. Talk about that aspect of it. Did you see that as a positive, Chris? That even if we both agree they just skip past the big Continental Classic a little too quickly, they did put a lot of wheels in motion for things coming up in coming weeks.
Yeah, I really like the emphasis on the Casino Battle Royal. I do have a kind of issue of Swerve being like, he lost the title and never had a rematch. So if I were him, I'd be like, why would I want to be in the Battle Royal when I could just get a singles match? But putting that aside, I like the fact that you had Jay White, you had him, you had Roderick Strong, Powerhouse Hobbs, MJF, other people, even Jeff Jarrett's fake retirement was about him going after the world title. I think it really put a good emphasis that people are focusing on the world title. They want to be champion. That's the number 1 prize in AEW, and this Casino Battle Royal is a good way to get there. So I really like that emphasis. The only issue for me, not really issue, but what's weird is the champion as Moxley is not just like a regular champion because he's so focused on world domination and changing the company that it's kind of weird for some people, for maybe baby faces, to be just like, well, I'll just wrestle for the title. It's like, because Moxley talks about all these other things that I'm still trying to figure out what he means.
Yes.
But I do like the fact that the emphasis of this match is important. There are a lot of people who want to be in the match. They see it as a quick route to a title shot in 2 weeks, actually, in Cincinnati, which is Moxley's home area. So I don't know what that says about the winner, who's it going to be, if they're going to have a good chance. But I do like the fact that a lot of wrestlers were interested. They want the title. They want to be in this match. It makes the match seem important.
We have some comments in the chat about this topic. Derek Hubbard said it felt like they have a direction and some focus. Unfortunately, the directions they are moving toward, Mox and Cope, are not that interesting to me, but it may just be me. Blake Riley said, I feel this show didn't say keep watching every week. It said it's 2025 and things haven't changed that much. That's not good. Edward Sladex says, I would say it was a good episode, but they definitely didn't take advantage of a starting point with Max and the new year. So let's comment. A lot of this, there's like 20 things to comment on this show, and I think 20 different hosts might lead with 20 different things. I don't think there's anything obvious. We're going to Jeff Jarrett stuff, and you just mentioned Mox and his promo and his direction. We got Cope, the former Adam Copeland, and then obviously the Max streaming service debut and more. So we'll get into all that. Well, let's talk about the Max aspect of it. Did you obviously with WWE being on Netflix is huge because they're switching from USA Network to a new place, and WWE really pushed that. I don't think Tony Khan cares if you watch on TBS or Max. Ultimately, he wants more people to watch overall because that's more ticket buyers, more pay-per-view customers that he can, potential market people he can market to. I know there's people who are not thrilled with Max. They pay for ad-free service and they got commercials. If you watched on TBS, you got double box. So you got to watch the action during the break. And on HBO, when they went to that first commercial break and they cut away from the match, I went to TBS, switched off Max, and there was the match during the break on double box. So people didn't love that. And if you start late or rewind it all, you actually can't fast forward through the commercials, and you can on DVR. That's probably coming to an end in the next 5 years. I think cable companies are going to find a way to take away the fast forward DVR functionality as we move to streaming. But so enjoy it while you can, I guess. But, they plugged it quite a bit. Our online poll on Twitter, just kind of a flash poll I put up, indicates that out of about 70% who responded to our poll, 30% just said they weren't going to watch. Nearly 20%, so 2 out of 7 people responding, which would be a 40% increase overall, are watching who don't have access to TBS. So they had a new audience tonight. I mean, it's a snapshot, unscientific poll, over 200 votes on our Twitter account at PWTorch, our X account. But to me, that indicates they had some new viewers, and that's where setting the stage going forward was important. They've got some new viewers. So just tell me what you took away from the Max streaming service debut tonight, Chris.
I did watch on Max. I put it on maybe 2 minutes early. First of all, putting it on Max, I had to find it. It wasn't on the top of the page. I had to scroll down to see that it was there. So I didn't think that was a good sign for someone who may not be looking for it or aware. That was a couple minutes early. What hit me, which is probably both, that the opening song was "I'm So Excited" by the Pointer Sisters, which I looked up, came out in 1982. When I was 18 months old, as the gray hair shows. That's quite a while ago. And to me, I just thought that was a bad look for someone that's never watched the show to play a song from, my toddler time. I just don't think that's a good way to hook people with music in 2025. But with Max, I don't know if this was the same as on TNT. There were some audio issues with some of the promos, and sometimes in the ring when they came back from commercial. Yep. And I assume there was no picture-in-picture, so it would cut to that blue screen. We'll be back after a few messages, and I was just like, I'm going to get a drink. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to make sure that my kids are still asleep. After we traveled a couple days ago, they're still struggling a little bit. And I know for people that want to watch every second of it, that's probably going to be a reason not to watch Max. And I don't know how that will really help new viewers if you're just going to retain the viewers that you already have.
All right, let's pause and formally introduce ourselves, and then we'll read some more reader comments and get on to further comment on the Max situation and some of the other topics that I mentioned from the show. This is a Wade Keller Pro Wrestling post show covering the January 1st, 2025 episode of AEW Dynamite. I'm Wade Keller, host of the show. I sound different because I was sick last week, didn't do a show, have not full-fledged laryngitis. I've gotten that before when I talk too much as a podcaster. So trying to limit my talking as I recover from that nasty cold last week and cough. But it is me if you're listening on the audio on the podcast side of things. We're here to talk Dynamite, kicking off the new year, the year of streaming services. Although, WWE is already on Peacock, obviously, and there's been other streaming services, but high profile, the A shows for both the top two companies moving to streaming, or having it at least as an option in the case of Dynamite is the start of a new era. And joining me today on the post show for the start of that new era is Chris Maitland. He is a PWTorch contributor. He is part of the Wrestling Coast to Coast podcast, which I believe will be going up tonight. You recorded that earlier. Chris, welcome to the co-host chair here on a Dynamite.
Thank you. Yes, we usually record during this time. But since it was a holiday, my broadcast partner and I, Justin McClelland, had the day off. So we recorded early in the day so I could go with the family to watch Mufasa in the movie theater. So Justin and I we do a podcast every week about mostly independent wrestling. This year, or this show that's coming out might be up now or very soon. It was a kind of year in review of independent wrestling, talking about some of the bigger stories, including WWE ID, Tony Khan versus GCW, the issues with streaming services, independent wrestling. We paid tribute to Jack Stane, who we interviewed 2 years ago, who a former NWA champion who passed away on Christmas Day, and talked about some of our favorite matches, promotions of 2024, kind of what we're looking forward to in 2025. So that show will be up. It comes up every on Wednesdays, as I said, usually record now, but because we recorded earlier, it allows me to be with Wade today to talk about AEW Dynamite.
Well, we just put the graphic up on the screen for our YouTube viewers. You can search PWTorch in your podcast app to subscribe for free. Different shows each day of the week on the PWTorch Daily Cast lineup. The 90s Past Cast, shows dedicated to AEW, WWE, NXT, and more. Also Wrestling Night in America on weekends, hosted by Brandon LeClaire, featuring our live post pay-per-view and PLE format. So subscribe for free. Check it out if you haven't yet. There will be probably multiple shows that are destination appointment listening for you in that lineup. A lot of great voices and just great pairs of co-hosts covering a wide array of topics. All right. If you want to be part of the show, you can join us live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday after Raw, Dynamite, and SmackDown. You can be part of the chat in live on YouTube, and we keep an eye on that throughout the show. Super chat certainly gets our attention if you don't want to get lost in the crowd of all the comments. I think we're going to have more people watching and commenting because of the Mac streaming service and the West Coast live, the ease of watching it live on the West Coast. And so join in the chat room. You can also email us always at wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com. You do not need to watch us stream our show live on YouTube to be part of the show. wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com gives you a chance while you're watching Raw, Dynamite, or SmackDown to send an email, a comment, or a rant to be part of the show and have potential to be on it when you listen later or watch us on YouTube or listen to us in the podcast format. If you're a VIP member or Patreon supporter, you can follow us on, or you can be a live caller with us. Just visit PWTorchVIP.com and my TV report or our Patreon page for that link to be a video caller. By the way, if you are a fan of what we do here and you're watching us on YouTube, please like this show, comment below, and subscribe to our channel. All of that helps. And if you are listening to us on the podcast side of things, which is what most of you do, don't forget to take a moment to give us a 5-star rating in whatever app it is that you use to listen to us, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is. Usually you have a chance to give us a star rating, and we would appreciate that very much. All right, let's get back to various comments on this show. By the way, Dougie Dog just threw in the chat a comment. I enjoyed the Earn Review flagship today. Thank you, Dougie. I really enjoyed recording that with Rich Fan yesterday. That's our blue logo podcast. This is our red logo podcast, by the way, our post-show format. The blue logo is more traditional podcasts, interviews, pay-per-view previews. They're all pre-recorded. We don't live stream them. They're not available on YouTube. Search Wade Keller in your podcast app. Subscribe to that. Rich Fan and I did about 2 hours of marching through the first part of 2024. Really enjoyed the conversation with Rich. I'm happy with that show. And if you haven't listened to it yet and downloaded it, we covered a wide array of topics. We just marched through the cover stories of the Pro Wrestling Torch Weekly newsletter starting in week 1. I read the headline and we reacted to it. That meant we were talking about New Japan and TNA in addition to the major WWE and AEW headlines. And of course, Vince McMahon, sex trafficking scandal and all that. So check that out. That's part 1. Rich and I are going to continue it because we spent 2 hours and didn't even get halfway through the year. So we've got a lot more to talk about and cover, which we will going forward. Okay. So thanks, Dougie. Appreciate you nudging me there or complimenting me, which nudged me to plug things here. Chris, what kind of difference do you think Max will make for AEW? And then, as kind of a separate question, how does it compare to WWE on Netflix? What are kind of the pros and cons? We know there's like formatting issues or the presentation, which is if you start late, you can't fast forward to catch up. You have to watch commercials, even if you pay for an ad-free tier, I'm told, from somebody who messaged me. And so there's some pushback on there. But somebody had commented in the chat room, the picture on HBO Max is a lot better than cable. It depends on your cable system. But streaming tends to be a better picture for sports than what cable sends through their wires with, coaxial limitations and stuff. So there's a positive there. And then just obviously reaching an audience. There's a lot of people who do not have traditional linear cable with the old TBS, TNT, USA Network channels, but they have Max, they have Netflix. So it's going to open up a new audience that maybe strayed away from pro wrestling because it just no longer was convenient for them to watch. So there's a few things there. What jumps out to you as important, and is anything being overblown?
Yeah, the question I had, and I don't have these numbers at the top of my head, this is probably definitely a Rich Fan question, but how many people subscribe to Max compared to Netflix? I think one of the issues with that I wasn't sure about is how many people actually watch Max who don't watch some of these other services. That I don't know. Netflix to me is a huge behemoth. Now I'm on Netflix a lot because that's the show that my kids like to watch are on Netflix, and they don't advertise WWE on that. But when I switch over to the channel or my channel, obviously on Netflix, you can do different profiles. It's all over the place, WWE, and has been for several weeks in coming up to the debut show. And I just didn't see that on Max today, and that was my main concern. I think that WBD, AEW has to hope this has to be really good, intentional of advertising it, that it's available there for their viewers. And I guess I have not seen that so much for it to be a sort of game changer. I think one thing for AEW that they can actually use a positive, I was a positive, but their ratings have declined a lot in the second half of 2024, and the streaming services aren't always exact on their viewers, so they can always claim that a lot of people are watching it on Max, even if they aren't, and it kind of defeats the maybe weekly rating discussion, because there will be a portion of the viewership who are not watching on on cable TV. But yeah, I think advertising it for people to watch Max, because Max is not Netflix. I think Netflix has, they had 2 NFL games the other day. They had the Tyson Paul fight, which is a big deal. They have these reality shows, some of which are really awful, but I watch them. I watch Love is Blind, not afraid to admit it, here on YouTube. So Max doesn't really have that type of programming. They have HBO, and they need to really focus on promoting AEW for it to get the word out there, to get more people to watch it.
Netflix has around 85 million U.S. subscribers, and Max has around 45 million U.S. subscribers. Netflix is way bigger internationally than HBO or than Max. But I've seen headlines touting that HBO, or that Max has more growth potential than Netflix. That it's a consolidation of streaming services, and they've got a lot of good content on Max, and that they understand that's kind of a big part of the game. I mean, there's, CBS is pushing Paramount Plus. Amazon is a huge player, especially with the NFL games, adding to their profile. Peacock may or may not survive as kind of the NBC equivalent of CBS's Paramount Plus. And then there's things like Stars and Showtime and stuff. It's murky, and there's a lot of movement. And if you subscribe to one, sometimes there's a sub channel that you're getting something else. Discovery Plus is in there too. So we're at a point where things haven't settled in yet. Being on Netflix in the United States, you reach a lot more people than Max. And internationally, it's even more extreme. But Max has a significant number of subscribers, and they are reaching a lot of people who just have cut the cord with cable. So I think those are roughly accurate numbers. Depending on the research that I've done, they even say, HBO numbers or Max numbers are a little murky, because there's people who subscribe through cable and they get HBO, and do they count, or are they not counted? It's a little bit murky in that respect. So it's a moving number depending on how you interpret, but it's a net positive, and certainly internationally for Netflix, because they're approaching 300 million subscribers internationally, whereas Max is still around 100 million internationally. Netflix just has a big lead, but I think that gap is going to close, and it could actually really help AEW in the next few years if they. Obviously, as they remain a partner with Warner Media, it's going to be helpful. It gives them a way to reach an audience that is cutting the cord, especially that younger demographic. And I think they're going to see a surge demographically with younger people who have streaming services but not traditional cable. And I think that's going to be helpful for them. Which, by the way, leads to another topic. And let's just flip to it. Is AEW cool? So I'll throw out, I don't think Roderick Strong, Kyle O'Reilly, Matt Taven, Mike Bennett are cool. I think they pull Adam Cole down. I'm not so sure Adam Cole's cool anymore. A few years ago he was. I love a lot of what those guys bring to the table as wrestlers, and I'm fans of their work. And when there's when there's people you hear are really nice people and they work hard and have put in the years, I don't take joy in saying they should be pulled from television, but honestly, I think they should just go to ROH. I don't think they're helping AEW at this stage. Almost all of them. Cole, I think you have to work hard and give him more. But I think even O'Reilly, who I'm a fan of, I think he's pulling down the cool factor at this point. Cope. Adam Copeland, 53 years old. I got a new nickname. It's Cope. I don't think that works. He had that cringy line at the pay-per-view about growing pubes. His judgment just isn't the best. He's, if you watched his stuff that he did with Christian back in the day, he's got juvenile humor. It doesn't match his mission in AEW and his cool factor. I don't know. I could go on. I don't want to. I mean, Todd Martin made the point in the Fix earlier this week, the VIP podcast. He wasn't a fan of MVP, Lashley, and Shelton and the whole Hurt Syndicate because it was another WWE cast-off group showing up in AEW, and there's just so much of that. You're watching Jeff Jarrett, who's more of a cast-off of WCW, and Copeland, and on and on. But he said, you know what? They're actually cool, and AEW could use a little cool, some people dressing well, and looking like stars. So, how are you feeling about the cool factor of AEW right now? Moxley's pretty cool, but we can't make sense of what he's saying, so that's not helping. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, as I said, the first thing, my head is down. It was a blue screen I put on Max, and I hear again, I'm so excited by the Pointer Sisters, which probably for Tony Khan remembers from the Saved by the Bell episode where Jesse Spano took too many uppers. It just doesn't seem to be something that doesn't shout cool for a song that is 40 years old plus. For the wrestlers, the Hurt Business are cool, but the problem is there are a lot of issues I had on this for the show. Like, they're supposed to be heels, and they wrestle like cool baby faces. They're calling for one more German suplex. They're like holding their arms up to the crowd. MVP's waving to the fans. I'm like, that's cool, but like, then make them baby faces. There was a time where the Acclaimed were cool, and they're not anymore.
No.
And there were a time where they were like cutting edge. There was a time when
I was thinking that watching them. I'm like, what happened to these guys? It was Billy Gunn ruined them. Their desire for they're leaning on the scissors thing for merch money ruined them. Yeah, keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they used to be cool. Mercedes Moné was cool for a long time.
Yes,
she was maybe one of the coolest wrestlers of them all, and she's not cool anymore. FTR, in their own sort of way, is kind of like hardworking guys who were kind of cool. They're kind of like people really took to them, and I was like, oh, they didn't even get that huge of a reaction. They used to get the biggest reaction on an AEW show, and I think part of it is
they've never been cool, which makes them a little bit cool. You know what I mean? Like they're not even trying in a sense.
They're cool in their own kind of way. Like they're in a different kind of way. Swerve, I think the only wrestler on there that to me has maintained his cool, even though he some of his motivations recently haven't made sense to me, is Swerve. Swerve is cool.
Yep.
I think that's about it. I actually, to be in his own sort of way, I thought Ricochet was cool today. In a different kind of way. But just popped up. Will Ospreay wasn't really on the show. But yeah, it's just it's very few and far between about cool wrestlers who you want to point someone to kind of get into on a base level just because that person's cool. Yeah,
and cool isn't everything. But when you don't have much of it, it can wear away at your brand and your viewership and people wanting to pay big money to be there and popping for your wrestlers. The chat room is no one's pushing back on the idea that AEW is not cool. It's one person after another. We'll read some of them in a moment here. And honestly, I mean, like we talk about AEW, like what should they change? And every few months, some of the same themes are there year after year. But every few months, sometimes something new comes up. And I think more and more AEW losing its cool factor is becoming more of a problem. Like I used to the big thing for a while was, from me, and I think I wasn't alone in this, is make your wrestlers seem like stars. Pick out a handful and really consistently push them as your top acts, but portray them as stars. I think they've done a nice job building up Kenny Omega's return in that regard. It's a good start, but it's just the start of something that has to be substantially more than what we've seen so far. So hopefully they don't just go mission accomplished. We showed highlights of Kenny doing high spots and put his logo on the screen. They got a lot more to do. I mentioned this earlier this week it was on the VIP roundtable after World's End. I said that I was talking to somebody pretty connected high up in AEW, said that they are going to be telling a Kenny Omega story. He's going to be very personal. He's going to connect with the audience in a way that he hasn't before because of the journey that he's been on this past year with injuries and this point in his career. So I hope that's true, and I hope they do a good job with it. But increasingly, and I think in kind of a sneaky, all of a sudden, whoa, what happened way, AEW isn't cool. And it's been creeping up, and I think Cope and the Pointer Sisters, like Elton John, I will argue Elton John is timelessly cool, especially 70s Elton John. But I mean, some people really like 80s, and I get that. But Elton John is just, he was the biggest rock star in the world in the 70s for years for a reason. I mean, his songs are timeless. They never were kind of gimmicky and all that. Different. Maybe people disagree, but they'll be wrong. I think he's forever cool. And just such a unique showman. The Pointer Sisters, I mean, maybe there's some music like theirs and like that song that feels timeless. Like, the theme to Collision did from Elton John, feels kind of timeless. This isn't it. And when I first heard it, I was like, really? Like, and I don't think the last Dynamite theme was cool either. I think it felt kind of retro, 15 years past its prime and all that, but man. So yeah, my point is, I think they have to curate, Cole, that roster and figure out how do we make sure that we have a ratio in here of cool. I think Tony Storm and Mariah May, cool. Mercedes looks the part, but as soon as she talks, all her promos are awful. Her character's awful. Well, her character's not awful. It's just her promos are awful. But I think there are ingredients, Chris, that if they go, it's a tough choice, and there's some talented people who we really like, but Jeff Jarrett, by the way, not cool. I'm sorry. Don't know if he ever was. And Slappy, whatever he said, it's like, Jeff's had a nice, Slappy. I mean, he's had a nice career, and he is a survivor. He is, I mean, I get the Last Outlaw type gimmick thing that he does, but given 10 minutes of him to talk about his family history for this, silly, predictable swerve. So anyway, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, the funny thing about Jeff Jarrett is, in some ways on the show, he was cooler than the Undisputed Era, which is probably in a sad way. But I think the issue that I've had with AEW, and I think the problem that kind of limits the promotion's growth, is making the wrong choices and picking the wrong people to put into prominent positions. I think there's been a huge problem with AEW on who they push forward and who they decide to run with the ball. I mean, they had, Wardlow was cool, Ricky Starks was cool, the Lucha Brothers were cool. Mm-hmm. Yep. These are all people who are not really on the show anymore for various reasons. Someone like Anna Jay is cool. Harley Cameron in her own way is kind of quirky, but people seem to like her. Yeah. There are people there. But, there was a time where people thought the House of Black were the coolest people on the show. Yeah, they did some spooky stuff. But I think the problem with AEW is a lot of it, again, on the show was reiterated. They have maybe a 1 or 2 week maybe introduction of someone, or a way to have them maybe wrestle one opponent that maybe works for 1 or 2 weeks. And then it's like, okay, we've moved on from that. Now we need to maintain, we need to go forward. And that's where they struggle. And again, I think part of it is like they've had wrestlers who I think would have the cool factor. Maybe MJF and Darby Allin are the only two that I could think of that don't have WWE history that kind of got a sustained push that were cool. But I just think, they have to make the right choices again. And to me, you spent weeks promoting the show on Max. You know that there are going to be people watching on Max who may have never watched AEW, and you pick a song from 1982. And again, I like the Pointer Sisters. My sister, who's older than me, by the way, she pointed out, love that song, played it a lot when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And, again, the Saved by the Bell episode. But again, in 2025, you're trying to attract attention to your promotion. I get it. A lot, Tony Khan's my age. A lot of the things he does on the show are things that my age people find funny from when we were kids, but that's not going to get to the masses. And I think you need to think a bit more about that in their AEW to think more about that in their presentation.
Yeah. I mean, it just comes around. I mean, Tony's got to run some things by other people and be open to having some of his perceptions, corrected in terms of what's best to reach the audience. I mean, I don't know. I think right now, I think that 1970s are cooler than the 1980s. I think it's aged better. I think David Bowie and Mick Jagger and Elton John. And I mean, there's just things that I think you go, oh, that person knows history. They're not just reliving their childhood. when you pull something that was mega successful and timelessly of high quality from that era. When you pull just kind of a pop song that people liked and it feels like you're trying to relive your own childhood a little bit, that's where I think there's a problem. We do have one vote for cool. KMB242 in the chat says Okada is one cool dude. I
think Okada, exactly. So I was joking about this because there's a New Japan documentary they did on Okada when they came to Dallas in 2019. I'm actually you can see me in the back, and they shoot the crowd at the press conference. But Okada's entire push from when he came back from excursion and then became kind of the face of New Japan for a long time was he was the cool wrestler. Not initially, he was kind of like a heel, but then he became the Rainmaker and had the robe, and they shot money down, and he won a lot. And he does some of that. It's like they watched. It's like they almost watched him on New Japan and on mute. And they're like, "Oh, I see the ring. I see the money shooting from the ring, and he has a robe. We'll just bring that to AEW, and have him say bitch, and that'll be fine." And no, there's more to that. I mean, his character is not. He's not cool. He's someone who just seems to be goofing off, and that's just his excellence or how he was presented. And him and Jay White probably are two wrestlers I think that they signed without understanding how they got over in New Japan, and just kind of threw them on the show. They're not presented in the same way, and therefore they're less cool.
I think a good point made in the chat is from King of Strong Style. It's not even the fact, and it's a Pointer Sisters song. It's not that it's old. It just doesn't belong on as an intro for a wrestling show. I mean, we're kind of ignoring like the other half of this, which is it's not about is it cool. I mean, it is about if it's cool or if it's dated. We had that discussion. But a whole other factor is, let's say it is cool and it's not dated. Is it the right way to set the tone for what AEW's target market is and what the tone of the show is? Did Jon Moxley get a vote on this? That's what I want to know. Because I bet he'd be like, you're going to play that right before one of my promos? You don't think that's incongruent with what I'm trying to do here? So what do you say to that, Chris?
I think, for me, it's funny. We have this on our show, Wrestling Coast to Coast. We joke because we do independent wrestling. A lot of the intro music is obviously music that was publicly available or that was released. Yeah. And so
that's the thing. We're talking about someone with an unlimited budget. That's the thing. They get their Tony gets his pick.
Yeah. So I will watch a show and I'll be like, a lot of the shows that get you hyped up, they're usually rap or rock music because it's a fight and you want something that kind of gets you hyped up. And this is not a song that does that. So if you think, if you go on YouTube, pick an independent promotion, just listen to the entrances, you're not going to find, unless it's some sort of ironic gimmick of someone trying to be silly or goofy, you're not going to hear a song like this on any of these shows. Yeah.
Okay. People want us to talk about Adam Copeland's hair, and I might stick with Adam Copeland. I don't know that I can stand calling him Cope, but I'll probably give in. People want to talk about his hair. Ramen Noodles says, unfortunately for Cope, we are in the HD era. That hair, bro. Did it jump out to you, Chris, as noteworthy?
It did. So it's funny. It didn't at the beginning when they did the promo in the back, the first promo and then the second promo with Brian Keith and Big Bill. But when he came out on the entranceway and he did his run to the side, then he ran back to the middle behind or in front next to FDR, and they cut over his head. I was like, oh. And again, I'm not someone that has a lot of hair, so who am I to judge? But I think, if you're in your 50s, kind of got to understand where you are, what you need to do. And, maybe he's upset or he doesn't want to get the ball chance like they give Ricochet. But I don't know. But then again, to me, the fact that they called him Cope, again, it's one of the very few AEW, more than the hair, the fact that he, obviously he wrestled for a long time as Edge. That's how people know him.
Yeah.
But he's been in AEW for a year. So when he came to AEW and they wanted to call him Cope, regardless if the name was good or not, that could have been the time to do that. He comes back on the pay-per-view. He appears twice. And all of a sudden, he's introduced as Cope. Who's Cope? I don't know who Cope is.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of for AEW. There were a couple of continuity issues We might get into some other ones, but sort of like if you want him to do that, he's talked in front of the crowd twice. Explain it at least. I mean, I wouldn't say that I would have loved the explanation, but just having him announced as Cope when most people there see him as Adam Copeland or Edge, just again didn't make any sense.
Yeah, it comes across as a 53-year-old giving himself a nickname to try to be a little more cool. Speaking of cool, Mark Piscetti in the chat said, Wade says, is AEW cool? My girlfriend less than a second later. No. Anecdotal here, but it's open chat. I'm not ignoring the ones where people are defending the cool factor. And we'll go to this one from Al Archer. The Pointer Sisters playing with pics of the Costco guys and Snoop Dogg to start the show. Double J cutting a fake retirement promo. Not cool. Where's Carlito when you need him? Dougie Doug says Trevor is cool. Ricochet. Yeah, he's more cool than he's seemed as a heel. King of Strong Style says, I'm so excited. LOL. What the F were they thinking with that song? Derek Hubbard said, I'm 39. My cool meter is broken beyond repair. My high school students remind me of this every day. If the live crowd is excited to see them, I think that determines some cool factor. I mean, yeah, obviously Tony's there every week watching crowd reactions. That said, you can have a crowd that gives you a positive reaction to things. They can laugh at the Adam Cole MJF skits. You can. I didn't think it. I know it's like a callback to other things, Jimmy Rave in Japan and stuff. But I didn't think that Swerve throwing, bringing out toilet paper rolls was cool for him. It felt gimmicky to me, and I don't know. It felt like let's do something kind of cute for TV. That felt out of line with Swerve's character. I didn't think that was cool. But so sometimes you can get a crowd reacting to something that can actually reinforce something that's actually driving people away. And I think you just have to be cognizant of that possibility at least. Jeff Pollard says, the other side of my pillow is way more cool than AEW. Points for cleverness there. Brian Bayless says, my 7-year-old son also prefers WWE to AEW by a considerable margin. He likes Darby, Omega, and Ospreay and a few others, but he much prefers WWE. And I don't think AEW should go, we're going to judge whether we're doing the right thing based on whether a 7-year-old likes us better than WWE. In fact, if their mission was, we don't want 7-year-olds liking our product, that's what's going to help us attract 18 to 54-year-olds is by not catering to kids. I mean, that's fine, but you got to figure out who your audience is and cater to them. Derek Hubbard adds, the live crowd tells me, well, Ospreay's cool. Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, and Rhea Ripley are cool. Maybe Swerve. Mark Piscetti says, Mercedes didn't just lose her cool factor. She's officially uncool. Though that seems a little redundant, but Dougie Doug said Young Bucks went from real cool to massive nerds. I
never thought they were cool. I just want to state that for the record.
I'm feel free to interrupt to point stuff like that out. That's good. That is good to know for the record. It is duly noted and marked down. KMB 242 says, how much of AEW losing their cool has to do with WWE regaining their cool and no longer being so wildly dislikable? What do you think about that, Chris? Because I think it's both, right?
I think that's a cop-out answer. I mean, I'm going to go back to when I was a kid. So maybe when I was 7 years old, I grew up in New York, a big WWF fan, and my parents watched it forever. But there was no one cooler than Kerry Von Erich in world class. By the way, it's not Texas Tornado Kerry Von Erich.
Yeah,
he was a very cool wrestler. Magnum TA, obviously before he was cool to me as a kid. I think, again, the issues with AEW, and I think we're 5 years plus now in AEW, and I think a lot of excuses are made for things that people try to perceive that are out of their control. I think they have, again, I was a fan of his in the NWA. We talked about the NWA and MLW and kind of how they're kind of falling off on our show that's out. But Ricky Starks is like one of the coolest wrestlers that they have. And whenever he was on the show, he was cool as a heel and a babyface. Now, whatever didn't work with him, I see someone like Mike Santana, who is in Impact, who's actually been pretty cool and getting a good run as a babyface. He was there. They didn't really push him as someone who was cool. I was at a AEW Dynamite a couple years ago where Wardlow got one of the biggest reactions when he was the TNT champion and he powerbombed a bunch of people. He was cool. The Acclaimed at one point were probably one of the cooler acts on the show. You could argue they're as cool as almost anyone. And, So for me, yes, people in WWE are cool, but you can have simultaneous cool wrestlers. It's happened before in multiple promotions, and I think what AEW has to do in this time, and I think a lot of it is kind of being examined with the possible Cope Moxley feud, is looking at who they're choosing for these positions and why. Because again, I think they have talented wrestlers that are there now that could be used better and that are cool, but they have to actually choose them and maybe not make some of the choices that they've made previously.
Yeah, no, all good points and well put. I want to defend nerd culture a little bit and go, like, when we talk about something being cool, it doesn't mean nerd culture can't be part of that. Like, I mean, there's aspects of AEW early on that were overtly playing to kind of the trendy nerd culture in the way that wrestlers carried themselves. I think Taven and Bennett are kind of going for that. I think Chuck Taylor was kind of going for that. I don't know, others probably were too, but I don't know. But they're not even hitting that anymore, is my point. Like, I don't think that people who are kind of into nerd culture are like, oh yeah, this is sort of self-aware, ironic, and trendy in a way where you're cool because you're not trying to be. So I want to say, like, for anyone out there who's like, well, why isn't the chat saying, trying to be cool is going to do them in? They should just be themselves, and the wrestling fans aren't looking for, this, they're not looking for a cool factor necessarily, but. So I'm throwing out there, I'm acknowledging that there is there's different types of cool. I just don't think AEW is pulling it off in any way right now, in ways even that they did in the past. You mentioned Ricky Starks. Derek Hubbard brought him up. Ricky Starks has been replaced by Danny Garcia. Garcia is a better wrestler. Starks had a much larger cool factor, though. That's the thing. Like, even Garcia, you go back to that. I thought he was like I thought Garcia was cool in that completely like unassuming way. This guy who's really good, doesn't know it. But it's nice. He's determined. He's going to fight hard. He's going to fight back. He's not going to be held down. He was a follower who kind of was growing out of being a follower. And then they ruined it when he went back to Jericho. And then they really ruined it when he did that weird dance. And it was part of the culture of a lot of pro wrestling right now, which is, can I see myself on social media as a GIF or on, trending on TikTok or something with people imitating me and doing it? That's where the scissor stuff, I think, completely ruined Caster and Bones. And Billy Gunn didn't help, obviously. And Danny Garcia doing that weird hip swivel thing. It just, you can't take anyone seriously who just seems that like desperate to just find some weird little appendage niche that doesn't fit anything that you would admire in someone fighting, and it didn't fit his character. And AEW just does too much of that. And there's too many wrestlers who seem, like even MJF, he's cool until he starts trying to do the hack, low-hanging fruit, shock jock, what's going to get me a buzz on the internet this week so I can get my little dopamine rush when I go back to the locker room after my promo and everyone's going, oh my God, he said that. It's like, that's not being a top heel. Being a top heel is what Roddy Piper did, and that is putting your opponent over, putting yourself over, and getting people to want to see you fight, and taking what you and portraying that what you do, you take seriously. And, one of the great things that I think one of the more underrated aspects of any wrestling show is when the announcers and the wrestlers, with a straight face, consistently and convincingly make you believe that they think what they're doing is the most important thing that can be that's going on anywhere. Like, it's proving who the best wrestler is in this company. And too often wrestlers are just worried about likes and hearts and reacting to randos online and wasting their time trying to get a little clip that goes viral. And I think that's hurt the cool factor too. I mentioned the announcers. Edward Sladek said, I think AW needs to change announcers. I don't think they project big, and they're not raising the product. It's not so much that they're bad. They're just not providing the narration needed. I don't disagree with that.
I think it kind of struck me too today, and I know this was a big issue at the time, but when in the main event, when they were I can put Cope through the table, and the announcer scurried, and then you see Excalibur in a mask, and it's like, is there any play-by-play announcer of any sport, of anything you watch where they're wearing a mask? Like, why is he wearing a mask? I mean, he can be, he can use a different name if he wants to do that. I know he wrestled previously, but I think the problem with AEW is not a serious promotion. Like they don't take themselves seriously. Not that every wrestler and every promotion always take themselves seriously, but there's a seriousness factor to it.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like, people are there, they're invested in what they're doing, and that's the most important thing. In AEW seems to be they're not like their mentality is, well, you're going to watch anyway. We don't need to worry about making this seem really important. They have times where they try to do that, but I think it really hurts when your lead announcer's wearing a mask. It just doesn't. It just. I mean, if you don't see him, I guess you may not know, but it just kind of looks. It just kind of looks.
We see him, but he's on TV every week. I don't think it's ever been explained. They don't talk about it, and it's just kind of dorky. But I mean, that is a factor. But Tony Schiavone is like this, treasure of so many generations of wrestling going back to the 80s. But is he an Excalibur and Matt Menard, even Nigel McGuinness doesn't, at one point I thought he would have added some edge, a little bit of cool factor and credibility. And he's just doing, kind of a derivative heel commentator shtick that I don't think is real focused. I don't think they're produced particularly well by Tony, but I've never thought Excalibur was the announcer that AEW needed to grow. I think Excalibur is an announcer that validates a lot of things that the core AEW fan base loves about wrestling. And he can recite a bunch of facts and he can, tell you about the Rev Pro title. And, it wasn't a note he was handed that he's reading, but something that he lived through in real time. And there's value in that. I just don't think it's the face and the masked face and voice of the company. I've said this multiple times recently. My issue with AEW announcing isn't that they don't competently, within reason, cover, call the matches. It's that they're just not good at excitedly bringing other people into it. And there's always been that kind of vibe to AEW, which is this. There's been a lot going on off your radar, and all those people who didn't like WWE have shown up. And if you don't know what we're talking about, go do your research, because this is where the cool stuff is happening. And it happened in Japan. So, it's got to be cool. And, it's got that extra 1.5 for all the matches because it's just better over there. And the indie scene that you missed out on, PWG and all that, it was there and they had this great base to start with, but they didn't have that announce team that said, now, if you weren't part of it, I'm really excited and good at bringing you into it. And here's how I'm going to give you the facts needed and share my excitement so it's contagious and you come on in. The crowds did that, but I don't think the announcers ever did. And so I don't know. I mean, there's a lot going on in AEW that I think, and I thought the show 2 weeks ago was a real step in the right direction. I thought tonight's was competently formatted and there were some good aspects of the show for sure. But coming away from it, between Cope and Jeff Jarrett and the Pointer Sisters, I mean, I came away thinking, and then some constants, like you said, Chris, the mask on Excalibur, just thinking it's an increasing problem, and as Todd mentioned earlier this week, the Hurt Syndicate add a cool factor, but it also, in a way, is detrimental because they're so freaking cool. They're so well-dressed and dignified that it makes so much other stuff just seem undignified or too casual. Like Kyle O'Reilly, I'm a fan of his work, but I mean, he shows up looking like he just got it from a nap, I mean, so I don't know. Anyway, Chris, you want anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, I feel like it's kind of weird. The Hurt Syndicate, for example, like they've come in and they so much look like bigger stars almost than everyone that's been on the show, which is bad in a lot of ways because they've been around. It's almost, I compare it in a way to like someone like a Jacob Fatu who went to WWE. He was cool, but it wasn't like he took away like from anyone else who's already cool that was there. He was kind of like added to the cool ensemble. While when they come in, it's like, oh wow, they're actually cooler than everyone else. I think the funny thing with Tony Schiavone, he's somehow become this cherished announcer, and he's somehow flipped from when I was a kid with Jim Crockett. He's become like David Crockett was back when I was a kid, just sort of happy to be there. Isn't it great? And I think the problem with AEW, and one of the things that I wanted to mention with the Omega Okada feud, is that AEW relies too much on things that happen not on their show, and that's an example. So,
yeah,
Okada and Omega, for those of you who don't know, they wrestled 4 times in New Japan. I looked this up because I was in a conversation with Rich Fan, but their last match was June 9th, 2018 for Dominion. So when they show up when Omega shows up at World's End, it's this big stare down. However, on the May 1st episode of Dynamite, Kenny Omega, they were in Vancouver, I believe, and Kenny Omega came out kind of teasing his retirement, and him and Okada had a stare down, and he got jumped by the Elite, and they injured him, and he set up that Anarchy in the Arena match. I can't remember what one of those matches that they have, a multi-man match with the team AEW. So they've already had this big stare down, and in their world, the stare down that took place in Japan, or the few that took place in Japan, there hasn't been a match in over 6 years is more important than what happened on their own television show 6 months ago. And that's a really problem mentality, because they're telling you that their show does not matter. And that, to me, is not good to keep viewers watching every week and making the show seem important.
Yeah. King of Strong Style says, I really hope they don't blow it with Kenny this time. I argued after World's End, Chris, that Kenny and Okada feels like a legacy match, a nostalgia match, not an old timers match. I mean, Kenny, they're in their 30s. Let's not overstate this. I mean, we've got 53 and 54-year-olds in Copeland and Jericho wrestling on the show, and Jeff Jarrett pushing 60, saying he wants to become world champion. But Kenny's beat up, and his cool factor has been damaged much to his own doing. Talking about showing up on TV like you just rolled off the couch and were late to catch the Uber to the arena. I mean, he showed up sometimes looking disheveled and completely unprofessionally disinterested in looking like a star. Because all that matters is 6 and 7 star matches, and Excalibur talking about how it's match of the year. There's more to becoming a star and drawing money. They got to get it right this time with him. He's beat up. There's not a lot of. I don't know if there's a lot of tread left on his tire at his age. He's years away from 40, but he seems as more beat up than maybe AJ Styles. So we'll see. I mean, maybe this time off did wonders and surgeries, and he's finally fixed up and he'll be durable. But you're right. What they did tonight made it seem like something that is not part of AEW canon, like specifically, but has been pulled in because of their pulling from, and it's an asset for a lot of people that they pull from the international happenings in wrestling. But there comes a point where it's no longer fresh and exciting. It is living in the past, and there's a risk here. And that was my lead. I think they should have made what happened with Fletcher and Ospreay seem to matter more than what's going on with Kenny and Okada, at least the week after, or within days after World's End. And they didn't. And so, yeah, they're making the outside world seem more important than their world. But then again, we got a 10-minute segment with Jeff Jarrett teasing retirement. So maybe they do need to rely on what happened in Tokyo, 7 years ago, because their own judgment isn't great.
Yeah, I think, and it just popped in my head, you mentioning, I know it's from a sad anniversary, but Owen Hart's last match was him and Jeff Jarrett versus Edge and Christian before his unfortunate accident.
Yep.
This is May of '99. This is, again, senior in high school. And if someone would have said that, these three would be have a prominent Reno Christian didn't wrestle, but he's actually advertised for a match against Hook. And I think Hook is cool. I want to add him in the cool factor.
But he's like, he had a lot of ways to fall. He's a lot less cool than he was 3-4 years ago,
yeah.
I would argue. But he's still cool.
That's kind of the problem with AEW. Like, people come out cool, and then maybe they're cool for a while, but they don't keep them cool. I think the issue with Kenny Omega, and a lot of it, there's a lot of wrestlers in AEW, all this issue is that they are not necessarily built for American weekly TV. And a lot of people talk about New Japan who don't actually regularly watch New Japan or follow it. I don't watch New Japan regularly, but I followed it closely for several years. And they have different structure than, American wrestling companies do, with the week-to-week television and doing all those things. And so in Japan, you just have to have good matches. And a lot of times, you can save your top singles match for the end of the tour. You can wrestle, 4 or 5 tag matches and wait for that. Here, with a week-to-week basis, you have to have, cut promos. You have to have different angles. It's a different skill set, and that's not something that he's shown all the time. He's had his moments, and I think they need to do a good job of highlighting him. But again, what I said before, he was jumped by the Elite. He was kicked out of the Elite. Jack Perry, Okada, and the Young Bucks, when they injured Tony Khan and put him in the neck brace around the NFL draft. That was his last appearance on AEW.
Yeah.
Before World's End. So he's coming back to address the crowd next week. He has to address that.
Yes.
They all still work for the company, right? There's no NDA I don't know about.
Okay. The latest chat just popped up here from Elton Archer going, more important than nobody being cool is nobody is hot. But I don't think those are separate. But I think what you just bring up, Chris, is important too, which is, and it ties into like, you know, Fletcher and Ospreay just not even barely being mentioned tonight in the Continental Classic. It's just, no, we're moving on to this dream match for 2,000 people in every city. Not 15,000 in every city or 10,000, you know, Okada and Kenny, but we're not going to put the work in to bring other people into this. And they need to build it from the ground up. The people caring about Kenny Omega. And part of it is, like you're pointing out, owning your history. Like don't give people the impression, and it happened with the Continental Classic in just a matter of days, where all that investment was like, well, it's no big deal. We're moving on to Okada and Kenny. Kenny's circumstances and what was going on the last time we saw him should be absolutely a big part of what he talks about when he comes back. There's some things to forget about. I wish Adam Cole and MJF just forgot about the whole devil thing and just moved on. Some things you don't need to tie a ribbon around or you know, whatever, tie up the loose ends. But as Fan Blast says, I need Kenny to cut the heartfelt promo of a lifetime next week. You know, Kenny's got to bring it. If he can still be a difference maker, Chris. I don't think it's too late for him, but he can't just come back and just do what he was doing before. It can't
be the best bout machine. That doesn't really matter. He has to be someone that people care about.
Yes, absolutely. King of Strong Style says, I really hope they don't blow it with Kenny this time. I mean, what I'm hearing is there's some self-awareness of what they need to do. You know, do they have the stick-to-itiveness to do it? We'll see. Let me add another thing. Fan Blast said, I like fundamentals. I don't need constant excitement. AEW is so sloppy most of the time. This was well put together. I applaud that. I want their sound to not be, I want when they go to a location in the back of an arena, somebody goes, wait, the acoustics are bad here. Let's not broadcast promos from here. That wasn't the big problem this week. This week, they just had a bad microphone. And it was scratchy. It's like, that shouldn't be happening 5+ years in. And it's been happening all along. The director missed the shot of Cope leaping onto Mox. Or was it Mox or Claudio? I think it was Mox over the ringside barricade. Yeah, they got the landing, but they missed that. How do you miss that? So it's still just not, it's just not a professional, it's not as professional of a production as it ought to be. Dougie Doug said, if you would have told me 3 hours ago Wade would start a sentence with between Cope, the Pointer Sisters, and Jeff Jarrett, I would be so confused. Let's talk about Jeff Jarrett, Chris. We've mentioned it a lot. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe he's going to retire. Maybe there's some nagging injury or something, and it's like, you know, he's just coming to terms with it, and it's sort of his goodbye moment. Instead, he stole John Cena's thunder. Who's going to be thinking about John Cena this year now that Jeff Jarrett's on his final quest? Very, very rude of Jeff Jarrett to Bigfoot John Cena like that. But seriously, Jeff Jarrett is associated and contributed to some of the most uncool products out there. TNA, which again, I like to say this once in a while. I had the conversation with Jerry Jarrett, Jeff's dad, when he was coming up with the concept for NWA TNA. They were going to run on pay-per-view on Tuesday nights, not Wednesday nights, Tuesday nights. TNA was Jerry Jarrett's attempt. For people don't associate that with tits and ass. They don't think about that when they hear TNA. They do, because that was the genesis of it. Jerry Jarrett actually wanted wrestling fans to think they were buying soft porn. So he came up with the name TNA as Tuesday Night All-Stars because they're going to air on Tuesday nights. Problem is, WWE had Coliseum home videos airing that night, and they got bumped to Wednesday. But Jerry Jarrett was so in love with the letters TNA because he thought because they were coming out of the Attitude Era, and he wanted people to think they're going to see cleavage and sexual content. And then he found out pay-per-view companies didn't want that. It wasn't a free-for-all. It was so... I love Jerry Jarrett in a lot of ways, but it was so poorly researched what they could get away with on pay-per-view. So TNA, they after the fact came up with Total Nonstop Action as the letters TNA. It's so dumb. And then Jeff Jarrett, I'm sorry, it just not not a cool guy nationally. Maybe
in the mountain.
Yeah, maybe in Nashville or something. But I mean, and so we talk about the cool factor. Jeff's never been it, and he's been part of some of the worst wrestling products out there. He was, overpushed himself in TNA to the detriment of, AJ Styles and Samoa Joe. Is a little, I was going to say a little rich of Jeff to say we produced some of the great talent that came out of there because, he did, sort of discover, Jerry Jarrett discovered, thanks to Bill Barron's, AJ Styles, a hot indie wrestler, but they also thought David Young was going to be a big star too. Those are the two guys Jerry Jarrett brought up to me when he was talking about who the centerpiece young stars were going to be in his company. And David Young wasn't cool and wasn't very good and marketable. Samoa Joe was great, but Jeff held a lot of them back. And there was a lot of stuff in TNA that felt like living in the past. And that was like 20 years ago. And here we are with him getting a bunch of TV time on AEW Dynamite as if the whole world is on the edge of their seat, worried about what Karen Jarrett and Sanjay Dutt, Jay Lethal, talk about uncool, just a group of clowns. And then Jarrett gets all this TV time to run down his Wikipedia page. I sound like I'm being harsh. I just don't think that belonged on national television in 2025, Chris.
I have a counter for that, actually. Connect with what I said before. If they did this last summer when Jeff Jarrett was at the Owen Hart Invitational Tournament, and he cut that really good promo and then he lost.
Yep.
And then he did this. As like, I'm going to try, one last run, it actually would have been better. The problem is that like he'd barely been on TV for months. Yeah. And then he appeared in I guess he was in the World's End pre-show against QT Marshall. And then he made a run into the Ring of Honor show apparently as well. And then he did this. And that's kind of the problem with it. It's like all your comments are 100% true, but it would have been better perceived if it had happened when he had that thing. He had sympathy for a while when he was kind of getting beat up by Hangman Page and he was trying to fight against him. That it was the point to do this, not take him off TV for 4 months and then suddenly have him wrestle one match against QT Marshall. I was like, oh, I can't believe he might retire. Like that's kind of the AEW booking problem.
Totally.
As before.
It's wrestlers who know how to survive, taking advantage of Tony Khan as a pushover by coming up with ideas and him not being able to say no. He is getting worked left and right by his talent. Billy Gunn, the joke is Tony can't say no to Billy Gunn, and everybody in the locker room looks around going, if there's anybody who needs to be told, get off television, it's you. He disqualified himself when he wasn't the one doing jobs and matches, and he was pinning young guys. He was no selling stuff. It was as blatantly selfish and counterproductive a run of a veteran as there is. And it's not like he was Razor Ramon. He was Billy Gunn. TNA tried to push him as a single star, and it did not work for a reason because he's a needlessly big tag team wrestler who was carried charismatically by BG James, Road Dogg. And he ruined Caster and Bowens during their prime years. He ruined them. They participated willingly and seemingly enthusiastically. Bowens and Caster should be big stars in AEW right now, but instead we got Roderick Strong, Kyle O'Reilly, Matt Taven, Mike Bennett, Jeff Jarrett. It's just there are people who AEW should have been focused on consistently, and we're getting this instead. Jeff Jarrett's a survivor, and he learned the Carney way. And now he learned. Hulk Hogan did the same thing. Hogan always found a way to add a little bit extra relevance and TV time, and that's what this is. It's like, hey, Tony, how about I do this? And Tony's doing maybe brought up John Cena, maybe he didn't, but it's just Jarrett being a Carney survivor, finding another reason to get TV time. But it's not gonna. It's just. I'm sorry, Jeff's not a top guy, and people aren't nostalgic for the Double J gimmick that was, when he was a upper mid Carter. I don't think he'd love that chant. He'd rather have people doing slap nuts and talk about not cool. So yeah, that was a lot of TV time for a lame swerve that's leading to the ridiculous notion that fans are going to get behind a guy his age trying to take out Moxley. It's just, I know you want to have subplots when you do a gauntlet match and, but my God, that roster and that you gave that kind of attention. Jeff Jarrett should be putting his resources towards helping young guys stay on track. Because I tell you what, Jeff Jarrett did a lot of smart things with got a lot of crowd heat and got last year a lot out of his in-ring work by using a lot of old school tricks that are timeless. And that efficiency of what he did. I have a lot of respect. It doesn't sound like it, but I have a lot of respect for Jeff Jarrett in a lot of ways. if he listens to this, he'll never want to talk to me again. But Jeff, what he did in the ring was a clinic for a lot of the young guys who are beating up their bodies and doing a bunch of moves that just end up numbing the audience to spots. And he knows how to milk a crowd and get the most out of the minimum amount of physical exertion, which is ideally the plan. I mean, if you're getting a crowd reaction, people are emotionally invested in what you're doing, that's a victory, not some star rating that somebody gives it who watches every single international match. What matters is, is the crowd reacting, and are you drawing? Jarrett wasn't drawing, but he was teaching wrestlers how to get a crowd reaction. He should be using that skill set to help teach the younger guys in that company, not eating up that much TV time.
And this is kind of where I know they won't do it, but this is kind of why maybe with the TV deals that AEW should have a brand split. They should have people that are on certain shows. I think the reason why people like things like the Continental Classic, some of these tournaments, is because AEW booking is generally chaotic. And when you have kind of tent poles, it kind of helps. And if you were able to separate, like, again, if you had two shows and on one of them on a small corner was kind of a Jeff Jarrett thing, or maybe he's working with someone to help him out or, put them over, that would be fine if you knew that that was only a small part of kind of 4 hours of television. But when you don't have that, because it's kind of like someone might be on Collision this week, they may be on Dynamite next week. We had a Rampage up until last week. This is where AEW, I know they don't want to do it. It's kind of annoying with me with AEW when they decide they want to be like WWE, and when they don't want to be like WWE, instead of doing things for their own benefit, it would help for them to just split the rosters, not have people from Ring of Honor on this, Commander's the Ring of Honor TV champion in the Continental Classic. Jericho's the Ring of Honor champion on the show all the time. Put people in one place, keep them there. You can have pay-per-views be cross-promotion, and the pay-per-views become more special, and accentuate those folks because they have more time and more limited resources to use them.
Let's bring up some chat comments on Jeff Jarrett. King of Strong Stuff says, "Oh yeah, he told us Jeff re-signed for more years and money. It's comical." Yeah, he signed his last contract as a competitor until he decides he can eke another one out of another promoter. He wins King Strong Stuff. He wins a pre-show match and all he wants an AEW title shot. Standard Deviation says, "I think they'll use Jeff Jarrett for one championship match on Dynamite, similar to Hook last year. Hook is a lot cooler though." Should Jeff Jarrett get a title shot on TV? I mean, like you said, the promo that he did about the Owen Hart Classic was great. You're looking for TV main events. Is it something that might work? Is it something that's going to displace something that builds a foundation for AEW growing and being cool and being more successful? Like, it shouldn't just be the loudest or most convincing or most manipulative person in the locker room who gets TV time. It should be a boss understands what the best use of TV time is, not just good use when someone pitches something to you. I'm loading my question to you, Chris, but do you think that is a good, 1 or 2 or 3 week program for Jeff sometime early this year?
I think, as I said, it could have been if you had worked off how he had established himself last summer.
Yeah.
Now, you have to do that again for 3 or 4 weeks to maybe lead to a title match. I actually think, and this doesn't happen a lot, but there's actually a way to. Sorry.
You said I think, and this doesn't happen a lot. I'm just picking up wording.
I think
it just struck me. That pause was really perfect. Yes.
It doesn't happen a lot. That they need to, we need to be okay with kind of intermediary title challengers. Moxley's supposed to be this vicious, person trying to destroy the company. And someone like Jeff Jarrett is someone who might just be like, you know what? I've seen a lot in my career. I'm going to stand up and give it a shot. He's not going to succeed, but at least, he's someone who's going to try as you lead up to, the conquering babyface, whoever that's going to be. There's a role for that. But the problem is you have to actually spend weeks presenting Jeff Jarrett in this sort of light for him to then to go to that, to again, not have him on TV for 4 or 5 months. And then all of a sudden, I'd be QT Marshall, another guy that doesn't win any matches. I mean, he lost to Jay Lethal as Black Machismo on the Ring of Honor pay-per-view, which is, I thought, hilarious for wrestling history, Tony Khan. I don't believe Jay Lethal was Black Machismo in Ring of Honor. He did that in TNA, but putting that aside. And now he wins one match. He's like, yep, I'm going to be in the Battle Royal when tons of other people aren't. That's kind of part of what you're saying is this, you need to pick and choose who gets these opportunities and who gets to be spotlighted.
King of Strong Style says, if you're going to do this, you have to build the guy at least a month or two before the announcement. Where was that build? That's what you're saying, Chris.
Yeah.
Fan Blast says, JJ's one last run at Glory could be good in a vacuum. It's just surrounded by too much other nonsense. And frankly, I wount have had Sanjay Dutt, I'm saying, and Jay Lethal and Karen Jarrett involved in maybe Karen. But she's a little much. She's always quite a bit more than a little much in a lot of ways. But sometimes she's good. It's, I needed a moment alone and you do what you want to do. It was a lot. It was a lot of attention paid to somebody who maybe Jeff thinks he's that big of a deal because of all the world title reigns and all that. But he was headliner in WCW's most dreadful, worst time period.
I'm world champion.
Yeah, I had that graphic on the screen. Yeah. And in TNA, I'm sorry, the walk and brawl stuff and the son of the promoter, the co-promoter who's pushing himself as a world champion at the expense of, it just, I don't know.
Another interview or continuity issue for me that I thought was hilarious was Jarrett was being interviewed by, actually, Al Scoops, as he's now known apparently. Alex Marvez was interviewing Singh, Dutt, and Lethal, and they were like, we haven't seen Jeff Jarrett. And then Jeff Jarrett walks up to them.
Yes.
And then they go, can you give us a minute? And then Marvez walks away, but the camera's still there, so we can still see what they're saying. And then the first thing Jeff Jarrett goes, have you seen Karen? And they're like, well, we haven't, but we want to talk to you. And then she magically appears, luckily for this promo. And I thought to myself, I would be in trouble if I didn't announce some sort of major announcement to my significant other before I announced it in an arena full of people. I thought I would definitely be in my good sense to clue in my wife first before I made an announcement for thousands of people.
The notion that you can't see what the camera can't see has to go away in wrestling. AEW does it a lot more than WWE these days, but WWE does it sometimes too. This notion of, where is this person? Where could they be? And then suddenly there they are. And there's no way you didn't see them right next to the camera before they walked into the frame. There's just some low IQ production techniques out there that they just think don't matter. And part of it is because I think there's still a little bit of the carny look down at wrestling fans. They're not smart enough to pick up on the stuff, or they don't care. They won't notice. They're just wrestling fans. And a lot of promoters have gone out of business treating the wrestling fans in that kind of, patronizing, underestimating way. And it could just be incompetence on the part of the people producing the segment. They're not looking down at fans. They're just not very good at their job either. Ramen Noodle says, come on, Jeff Jarrett's playing his role well. He was good in that Hangman mini feud. He gets consistently, parentheses, maddeningly good reactions. Please don't make me defend effing Jeff Jarrett, but let's be fair. And that's why I'm saying, Jeff Jarrett is somebody else in the chat. He's not Sting. He's not John Cena. So he's not even Adam Copeland. Honestly, it's not that far off, but, so my argument isn't that Jeff doesn't get good crowd reactions. It's that he's getting good crowd reactions as AEW attendance is shrinking, as AEW is losing its cool factor, as young guys like Danny Garcia. Oh, we're pushing this guy, and now he's off television. Jack Barry.
He's on Collision.
Well, he's lost. He's not consistently shown on Dynamite. What happened to Jack Perry? There's Sammy Guevara. What happened to him? People who only watch Dynamite. There's people. Willow Nightingale. She's the rising star of the women's division, and then gone from TV for months at a time, or
once cool AEW Tag Team Champions Private Party, who were cool at one point and are not anymore.
Yes,
but now they're the Tag Team Champions though. So there's that.
Yeah. So my argument to Ramen Noodle isn't that Jeff doesn't get reactions. It's that you don't want Jeff Jarrett to be one of the most over people in your company. That's a warning sign. Shelton, even Todd Martin was pointing this out in the fix. Shelton Benjamin getting big pops is not a testament just to Shelton Benjamin and people being somehow still frustrated over him not getting a bigger push starting 15 years ago. It's a sign that AEW is not doing their job, making their guys more cool and more over with their audience. And so when somebody like Shelton comes in, it's the shiny new toy. Jeff Jarrett, I remember him from WCW, yuck, 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 ha, ha, the slap nuts and guitar stuff. You don't want that. Billy Gunn shouldn't be over if AEW is doing their job. People should be mad that he's getting TV time because they've done such a good job building up their own roster, and they haven't. So
yeah, I think one of the things we talked about on our show is that today the amount of people who are in NXT who once appeared in AEW Dark Elevation, who NXT signed and AEW did not. And I think AEW started with a really good connection to the indies. They signed a lot of wrestlers from the independents, but as they were able to have money for bigger name stars, it seems that Tony Khan focused more on signing them. And it's in a way kind of ironic because they've signed more names, but their attendance and their viewership has gone down. Where probably, if you look at Dynamite from 3-4 years ago, that was watched by more people, it probably had less recognizable names than on a show that we saw today.
Yep. Derek Mitchell says, one of the reasons AEW isn't cool is they never seem to strike when the iron is hot. As Chris pointed out, Jeff Jarrett should make that announcement last summer during the Owen Hart tournament. But that's the thing is, Jeff, the carny mentality that survivors like Jeff Jarrett have is when it seems like you're coming to the end, come up with an idea, find the right time to do it, tell the promoter who can't say no, charm him. Jeff is charming. I mean, he was raised on how to win friends and influence people. Like, he's just a walking checkbox of all those things. He finds something that you like and he learns about it, and then he talks to you about it every time he sees you. He's like absolutely like has that mastered. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's good to find something you share in common with people or that they like that you then talk to them about. But I'm not surprised he's able to talk his way into getting a major segment on the first Max streaming show where he's injected himself as signing his last contract and he's going after a world title. And, he's not staying. All right. We're spending a lot of time on Jeff, but they spent a lot of time on Jeff tonight. Dougie Doug says TNA nostalgia is weird to me because it was bad enough the first time. The 2024 TNA nostalgia promo we've all been clamoring for. Joe has a good question. How is Satnam Singh still on TV? How many stand around in the background contracts did Tony sign? I wonder that with Taven and Bennett all the time. Like, there's people that just show up at TV. It's like, why are you paying their hotel and transportation? Like, I mean, some of them are working a dark match or an ROH taping, but like, why are there just so many just appendages standing in the background? I mean, like, it's just wasted money, and why are you giving them TV time?
Yeah, I just feel sometimes it's an accumulation of a roster to do it. I mean, obviously, you also have wrestlers who are not being used and being paid to stay at home, which sounds great. I'm sure their bank account's happy and they're able to do all their Christmas shopping without having to go anywhere. But yeah, I just feel like that's part of why you need to have the roster split. You need to have people on certain shows to focus on them, and obviously you can trade or have a transfer window. Which I found funny, they stole that from soccer. Tony Khan probably definitely mad about that. But you need to have continuity for people. I mean, again, the funny thing with Taven and Bennett, which is they were I was obviously a big fan of Impact. They were in Impact. They were actually the tag team champions, and they rushed them to be on a Dynamite, or maybe it was Rampage at the time, for them to debut before their title loss aired. And it was like, oh, they actually are going to do something with them. And I don't think they've ever wrestled for the AEW tag team titles in 2.5 years. And it's like, well, you signed them, you kind of ruined the Impact storyline by putting them on AEW before they lost the titles. And it's almost like you just did it to do it, and you don't really have any use for them. And then, again, they are a very good tag team. And, again, if you had a true brand split, you could probably allow them to be a focal point. But instead, they're just kind of like they are the fourth and fifth members of the Undisputed Kingdom. You're muted. Muted.
Yep, sorry about that. I checked the inbox and I didn't see the mute, the red light. We got some emails that I want to get to also. The chat just keeps with good engaging comments though. So we'll get to emails in a sec, but Lady B says, I just want AEW to not be the main character of the show. I want talent to be, and it looks like after this show they've dropped the whole fighting for the soul of AEW thing, which is a plus to me. So Chris, you talked about it earlier, but talk about where the Moxley character is in that whole act. We have FTR and Copeland. Now Copeland showing up to defend AEW. Are they, we had the whole thing with Tony Khan and the NFL draft and the neck brace and the Bucks thing just get dropped. And multiple sources told me Tony didn't want even a storyline that suggested anyone was booking the show but him, which is just yikes. And a whole major storyline was dropped because he didn't want people thinking, even in storyline, other people were booking matches. And now we have this,
do it in the first place.
I know. And it's okay if there's a story that other people are booking matches. So like Brian Bayless in the chat says, Death Riders are just another generic heel stable. What do you think about Moxley? When we talk about the cool factor, and we touched on it earlier, Moxley should be cool. Claudio and Yuta in their own way as sort of backup players are kind of cool. Pac, I don't know. I mean, he's badass and grumpy, but I don't know if he's ever cool. But yeah, we'll talk about Moxley for a minute, coming out of World's End and what they're doing to kind of not reset, but move into the next phase for him. And after that, we'll talk about MJF, because MJF threw his name back into the hat for the world title picture too, and we should not mention that.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say, typically when we start the show, my daughter doesn't not asleep yet. She'll walk into the room while I'm watching, and she walked in while Moxley was cutting his promo, and I'm glad that I didn't have to explain it to her because I couldn't really understand it myself. My whole thing with Moxley is what is he trying to do? I think the whole problem is he has a cool factor, but he's supposed to be the heel champion who's destroying the company, and that's not supposed to be cool. It's for Collision, they aired a soundbite. The last person you see in it was him. And I can't remember the exact words, like, we're taking over or we're unstoppable or something like that. And I'm like, if you just watch that clip and you've never seen AEW, you think this is some kind of like badass fighter, Avenger type person. And that's not what he is. And I think that they have to make the problem with AEW is you have to make the show to a point simplistic enough for someone who can only watch it for a few minutes to want to watch more of it, as opposed to watching it feeling confused and giving up because it's like, why would I even bother to invest in it? I think he has not done a good enough job of being an actual heel. And really, he cut a promo last week about how he's wrestling three guys talking about how they want to have the title for Instagram likes or whatever. And I'm like, none of those guys that's their character that they would do. Like Hangman Page, Jay White, and Orange Cassidy's character aren't they going to be the champion for Instagram likes? So why are you even bringing that up? It's almost like he's saying things for his own benefit and not the company. I mean, I see him as being very selfish and just sort of doing whatever he wants in a way maybe different than Jeff Jarrett, but the end result is the same. Mute.
With Moxley, there's this character that's built on a gripe that was never introduced in canon into Dynamite, which is there's a bunch of wrestlers who aren't taking this seriously and living off of these Tony being a pushover boss, paying people to stand in the background or worry about Instagram likes and hearts, but it was never like established in the canon of Dynamite. And also, if it was, Moxley's a babyface. Like, I don't think it's a heel stance to take. So again, it's one of those just completely self-defeating gimmicks, like Daniel Bryan being for the environment, but because he was too preachy about it, we're supposed to cheer deregulation of exhaust fumes in cars that lead to smog and lung cancer. Like, it was just so stupid. But people defended it because, he's being preachy about being vegan and he's being preachy about EPA regulations and stuff. And it was just like, that might make Vince McMahon happy, but it's just not going to resonate with fans. And now you got Moxley going, we got a bunch of wrestlers who aren't badass like me. And it's like, and all the AEW fans are like, yeah, why are you a heel? That's the problem with AEW is what you're saying. We're on your side on this, but they don't want to own it. And so it is a mess.
I also can't have to mention as well. I just can't. It's kind of another issue with AEW. I just can't get over the fact that like they've committed crimes on TV with no retribution. I mean, they tried to
no ramifications at all. Yeah,
people are just kind of like, we move on.
Yes, they didn't. I mean, Rampage, a TV series, was ended last Friday because Moxley pulled the plug on it, which was just stupid to begin with. They don't have other equipment that they can plug in and replace. It's one of those, again, low IQ dribble nonsense things that AEW does. Just like somebody who's only slightly off camera being completely invisible to the people who are on camera until they show up on camera. Just stuff like that is nonsense, and it's embarrassing. But they didn't even mention it. If you're gonna do it, own it. And they didn't even. Literally one of their weekly TV series for years ended, and they did a maybe it's best not brought up, but then you shouldn't do it in the first place. It's like Tony Khan and the neck brace angle and Bucks taking over Power. If you don't own it, if you don't have a follow-up, don't do it. And there's so many things Tony does where you're like, did he think about he thought about week 1 and 2, but did he think about 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8? And so often everything just feels so impulsive. And then he's like, oh God, it's like rankings. Oh, that's a fun concept. Let's do that. And by the 3rd, 4th week, he hates it. Because it's a pain in the ass for bookers to have to justify especially when you're online as much as Tony Khan is, justify these nonsense rankings that don't fit your booking scheme because they don't match win-loss record. So you abandon it, but then he forgets, and a couple years later brings it back for a week and a half, and then abandons it again. There's way too much of that stuff happening. I hated Rampage, but they couldn't even bother to mention that Mox pulled the plug on that, says Derek Mitchell. Totally true. Derek Mitchell also says Mox has a cool factor for the rest of the Death Riders, but the rest of the Death Riders are beyond generic. And Fan Blast deservedly says Wade refusing to unmute is not cool. Well, it's not that I refuse to. It's just I'm not noticing when I'm looking at email. All right. Let's bring Josh, our on-site correspondent, into the conversation here. Josh, thanks for calling. Welcome.
Or Josh, hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes,
Josh, Josh. Great, they're both good. Yeah, so I'm driving home from the show from. Call me Cope. That's very over.
Josh. Yeah. All right. So you're at the show tonight. Tell us what your top takeaways are from attending.
Yeah, so it was a really. I don't know what it looked like on camera, but it's a very small arena, but they had it pretty much full. So I'll give them that. I don't know how we came across, but I thought the crowd was really engaged throughout. Got big reactions for FTR, Adam Copeland, obviously, hometown boys. They stuck around and chit-chatted with the audience for about 15 minutes after the show. I assume went off the air, since it was 10:20 when we left. That was pretty cool.
Talk more about that.
Well, it was very uninteresting and very local, and since I drove 2 hours to get there, it did not apply to me. But yeah, it was a lot about the hurricane recovery efforts, that kind of stuff, and just how cool it is to live in Nashville. When they made it sound like it is really cool to live in Nashville, but that doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
Some nice breweries in Nashville. Went there for 40th birthday for a friend of ours. So
yeah, Asheville's a cool town. I got to walk through downtown before the show. It's also the hipster capital east of Portland.
Yeah. There's a lot east of Portland. That's covering a lot of I would say Austin, Texas. Maybe east of Austin.
What about Brooklyn?
Yeah, well, it's not east of Brooklyn. I feel like Brooklyn's further
Brooklyn's east of Asheville. So yeah.
Josh, but what about Austin, Texas? Come on, that's it. I don't know if that's hipster, but it's keep Austin weird. I saw that last night on the countdown show when they moved to Central Time Zone. Austin is the Central Time Zone capital now, not New Orleans or Chicago.
I was just counting by old-timey beards and mustaches.
All right, we'll move on. No, I hear good things about Asheville, and if Chris Jericho is never going there, then I'll go there. I'm kidding. Maybe. So talk about the crowd pops for Adam Copeland and FTR, because it is not pandering to do charity work. So I want to put quote works around, or I want to make sure I differentiate this, because it's obviously a good cause, what they were doing, but it is sort of the kind of that, you're not going to get booed if you are the face representing charity for a devastating hurricane. So I just kind of ask about the pop that they got, that they had a little baked in advantage to get a pop. But that said, how over were FTR and Copeland in that main event spot?
Yeah, they were several tiers above the next highest pop, which was probably Swerve, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also, like you said, it's the relief efforts tag team with also they're all local to the area, a relatively small insular area. So yeah, but it was like head and shoulders, like it wasn't even a question. Maybe between those two, because they both got gigantic pops each. I think Copeland probably over FTR a little bit.
And so you said Swerve was next, a big drop off. What else? Like, actually, Ramen Noodle in the chat says, ask Josh if the AEW fans were confused on if Mox and the Death Riders are heels or not.
Against FTR and Adam Copeland in Asheville, they're definitely heels. But they still were pretty well received by the group. Like they came out right underneath where I was sitting, and everybody was like freaking out and taking pictures. So everybody likes them, but I think they understand that they're supposed to be heels, and they mostly just go along with it, especially against the hometown team.
I don't disagree with Fan Blast in the chat. Marina is the coolest member of Death Riders. She's pretty damn cool.
Marina's cool.
Jeff Jarrett. Talk about Jeff Jarrett. Did he hold the audience as we've been critiquing Jeff Jarrett and the amount of TV time he got and how he's kind of in a carny way gotten himself back into relevance in a world title picture. You know, I mean, he's not going to be the centerpiece like John Cena for the whole year. I don't want to overplay it, but I'm actually really curious, and I don't really get a sense through TV. How did the crowd react to him? I know there was a double J chant. He'd rather people talk about slap nuts because that's not a WWF gimmick from the 90s that people remember him for. But yeah, how did that go over with the crowd that Jarrett got that much ring time? Was he really over? Were people like hanging on his every word? Did they groan with the reveal that he's not really retiring?
Yeah, it was not great. The people around me are mostly like, if this is a real retirement, fine, let him do the Wikipedia version of his history, sure. But also everybody assumed it was not real. We were just kind of actually waiting for somebody to interrupt it so they could get the segment over with. It's the general consensus I got in my area. It did seem like way too long for Jeff Jarrett in 2025.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be a babyface turn to a lot of people, but if Moxley and his crew, the Death Riders, just beat up Jeff Jarrett and like, we see Jeff Jarrett in a full body cast in the hospital next week and his career is over and Dr. Z never wrestles again, that might be a better way to end this than actually headlining a TV show with Jeff Jarrett challenging for the world title one more time. But the odds of that are very small. I don't think that's why Jeff spent all that TV time, is to get Moxley and his crew over as villainous heels ending his career when he wants one last run. Chat room also wants to know, King of Strong Style says, did Mercedes Moné get a star pop?
She got, I am so embarrassed to say this, she got brief CEO chance when she came out. Which I don't know why people do that, but generally she got booed pretty heavily once she actually got into her spiel of promo. Was weirdly for that segment, they had a whole bunch of balloons in the ring, and right before she came out, they took all the balloons out. I don't know what to deal with that was.
That is weird.
Like, there was a whole bunch of black balloons, and they took them out. Maybe they thought it looked like a funeral. I don't know. But yeah, she they cheered her because she was a star when she came out. They even did the stupid CEO chant, but mostly they booed her once they realized that's what they were supposed to do, I guess.
What do you think? Go ahead, Chris.
So another issue with that. First of all, I do want to point out when AEW was in Columbus a few weeks ago, I was as the Franklin Park Conservatory with my family the day after, and I did see Mercedes Moné there. Did not bother her. She seemed to be having a good time looking at the flowers. So wanted to point that out. Additionally, another continuity thing with AEW, she is talking about a match at a Wrestle Dynasty with Mina Shirakawa for, again, the added Rev Pro title.
Yeah.
Which, again, if you don't watch, are not familiar with British wrestling, know what Rev Pro is. Did they at any point mention how a fan of AEW could watch that match?
No. I don't know what they did or didn't say on TV, but they did not mention anything in the building about what that match was, what that promotion was, what that belt might mean, anything like that.
Yeah. So yeah, they didn't mention it on TV, so you didn't miss anything.
Yes. Yeah. Just wild. How about the reaction to the Kenny Omega video? Did it seem like people in the building reacted like excitedly to him coming back, and were people disappointed they didn't get to see Kenny or Okada in person.
Yeah, there was, as they showed that Kenny video, there was kind of a build-up. And right before that, they had Justin Roberts in the middle of the ring touting they have a North Carolina t-shirt, because we're in North Carolina, obviously. I'm like, oh, man, maybe Kenny's going to show up. And then they showed that video, and then it said next week. And everybody kind of like, oh, damn. Yeah, because people definitely wanted to see Kenny, and were a little bit disappointed when he wasn't there. Probably same with Okada. Okada got like a big pop when he popped up on the screen, and an extra big pop when he said bitch, of course.
Yes. Of course. Anything else stand out in terms of reactions for others? Jamie Hayter, Julia Hart, Powerhouse Hobbs, Switchblade Jay White, Roderick Strong. Anyone that we haven't mentioned so far, where it was like, oh, crowd didn't react to them at all, or they reacted surprisingly well to them?
Yeah, actually, Hangman got a really good pop when he first came out. And then once they got into the match with Cassidy, the crowd got very behind Cassidy. Hangman got pretty heavily booed, especially at the end of the match and after the match for beating up Christopher Daniels, of all people. But yeah, that match was an opening match, obviously. But it was the crowd was really into that, but 100% behind Orange.
Good. I mean, that's the story they told. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
One more continuity, which again may tie into another Wade questions. Hangman Page hit, I think, 2 dead eyes on Orange Cassidy after the match, and all the referees ran out. Ricochet stabbed Sir Strickland with scissors, and nobody came out until the Undisputed Era. Thankfully, I mean, again, we made fun of them, but thankfully they had a heart, because he might still be stabbing him if they didn't want
that. I assume so. Also, That reminds me, like, Ricochet probably got the most heel heat, bar none, in the show. He got booed vociferously as soon as we saw him in the crowd. Yeah, that's good. And because Swerve's also massively over on top of that. Then Jamie Hayter and Julia Hart match was probably the quietest match on the show.
Yeah.
Although there were Julia's entrance is really cool in person, and on TV probably. But mostly the crowd was behind Hayter, and there were some good chants, but mostly, I don't know, people just didn't really get into that match.
How about who was I just going to ask about? Chris, ask your question, because I just drew a blank on something I wanted to ask about.
Sure. The question I had, the Hurt Syndicate, they seem to be baby faces against the Acclaimed. I know Max Caster is not the most sympathetic character, but did they get a huge baby face reaction, the Hurt Syndicate?
They did, yeah. I mean, Shelton's from South Carolina, so he's a neighbor. They got a pretty big reaction, way better than the Acclaimed. And we also didn't get an Acclaimed rap, which was disappointing. And we didn't get Billy Gunn, which is whatever the opposite of disappointing is.
Yes.
But
Max Caster said, I'm not going to get in trouble for rapping. And then the camera cuts to him in the ring, and he's juggling testicles near his crotch with his hands. Like, I just like the irony of that.
But also, again, it was like the timing. You know, they came in this match having issues based off what happened on Rampage, which they didn't show. They should have shown that. And then had the promo with Bowens and Caster arguing. Caster said he isn't going to rap. And then later shown the match, as opposed to showing that match when everyone expects Max Caster to rap. He's already in the ring. And then for those of us watching at home, we are explained why he's not rapping.
Oh, well, good for you guys at home, because I didn't watch Rampage. I didn't know what the hell was going on.
Listen, my issue with AEW is the first, I guess, only Dynamite show I went to. I found out that I found out about promos that happened on the show by listening to a Wade Keller review of the show. And I was at the show, and I'm like, oh, this happened? Oh, wow, I didn't know.
Wow. Speaking of which, MJF's promo, that's what I was going to ask about. I blanked out on. Did the crowd pop for him like they did Okada and Kenny? Did it seem like they were, hanging on his every word and booing him? What was the reaction for him, Josh?
It was positive towards MJF, because he comes across as a pretty big star. I mean, if he's supposed to be a heel going after heel Moxley, I'm not sure what they're going for there. But the crowd, was excited to see him and hear from him.
Josh, anything else you want to share with us from your experience in the arena? I don't know how many AEW shows you've been to. Maybe compare it to other AEW or WWE shows in terms of crowd reaction and the makeup of the crowd and that kind of thing. But yeah, take your pick. Anything else you want to send our way?
Oh yeah, so I've been to several AEW shows. Usually it's a larger venue with less people, so this was nice to be in a nice full venue.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I thought the crowd was really good. It was a decent show. It was a fun show to watch live. I don't know how it's on TV, but I mean, I've listened to the show a little bit. Apparently, there are definitely some issues, but just sitting at the show, it was nice, breezy, 2 hours in and out.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Also, I think there might be too much blood in AEW. I'm probably not alone on that, but they've gotten to the point where they have, I think, like 3 mats just stacked up, and when one blood all over one, they just pull it off, and there's a nice fresh one underneath. They don't even change the mats; just have a stack of them ready to go.
Yeah. The camera hovering on Swerve for like 30 extra seconds when he was all bloody was just like, wow, okay. And then we had to, watch Kyle O'Reilly, Adam Cole, and Roderick Strong act like they had discovered some alien who fell out of space and landed in front of their hood. Like, what is this? What should we do? Is it scary? Should we get too close? What happens? And then
they brought a stretcher out for Swerve too, and then he just kind of walked off. I'm not sure what they were doing there.
Yeah. I mean, it's screwdrivers, scissors, plastic bags,
Julia Hart had an
poison.
arrow at one point for the record.
Yes. That the very gullible referee not only got rid of, but then spent an extra 10 seconds talking about it to somebody at ringside, apparently, an invisible person, about what to do with it so that they could get the interference in. I mean, honestly, Tony needs to sit down with somebody who's just going to bluntly talk about how stupid the show can be sometimes. And I know there's people who are very forgiving of it because the pay-per-views are great. But damn, it's just, there's a lot of just low IQ, dumb stuff that should be cleaned up. And it's
I've mentioned 4 or 5 of them myself.
Yes. All right, cool. Josh, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's about does it.
Thanks. Appreciate you calling, Josh. Thanks.
Thank you. Drive safe.
Anytime.
Yeah, drive safe. All right, cool. Let's go to email here. Zach Barber. Let's get some positivity from Zach. He isn't in the chat with us tonight. He writes the AEW Feud Tracker column at PWTorch.com, which I highly recommend. It's a really good primer for me every Wednesday going into Dynamite to have him remind me and fill in gaps on storylines because he does a better job telling AEW stories than AEW does. He says, let's see here. The new era of Dynamite has begun, but I got to love 80s music as much as Tony Khan. However, I did not expect I'm So Excited by the Pointer Sisters to be the new theme song. I popped because I love the song, but it's going to take some time to grow on me. If Zach is saying it's going to take some time to grow on me, that means it was an awful decision and no one else is going to give it time to grow on them. He said, I watched the show on Max. The sound and video quality were great. There were no streaming problems, so that was good. Content-wise, I thought they got off to a good start. They kept Jay White in the title picture, which is smart. Fans still have no idea what to think about him because he's always in 3-way matches. He doesn't take stands, and he's good, but he's not treated as a star. Chris, let's pause in the email here. What do you think of how they're handling Jay White? I like that he's getting mic time and TV time and match time, but it's still like he's not defined in any way that I think guides the fans or where the fans would latch on to anything regarding him.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, they do not know how to book Jay White, or they don't know how he was effective in New Japan. Jay White was basically, first of all, he was a heel, so which he's not anymore, I don't think. And also his style,
maybe not.
Yeah,
Hangman, heel or face, we don't know.
Depends. Yeah. It changed during the match.
Yeah, it did.
Jay White is someone who he really got over in Japan. One, he was a heel who would do heelish things, but also he was almost like a counterpuncher wrestler in the fact that he would take all of your offense and somehow find a way to win. Yeah. But that doesn't really work in AEW. And I think part of it is we kind of know he's in a faction. They're all injured, apparently. And he's never really been a clear babyface. He obviously has a feud with the Death Riders, but he hasn't been established as someone who people really want to cheer for. So they haven't given him, kind of that 10-pole moment where people kind of know what he stands for, know what he is, and can get behind him.
Yep. All right, back to Zach's email. MJF made his own selfish intentions clear. Did you like the MJF promo, by the way, Chris?
I did. I thought it was good. I mean, he has his own. I love how he says Bud, by the way. That's such a Nassau County. He's from Nassau County, which is my home county. I was just there last week for Christmas. Just such a Nassau County thing to say. But I do like the fact that you have all these people, him and Swerve, who are like former world champions, who are like, no, I do not want to spend my time in meaningless feuds. I want to get back the biggest prize in AEW, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
I wrote, and this was just for VIP members, in our roundtable reviews of World's End. And so it just like, Alan Cunahan and Sean Radican and Rich Fann and Greg Parks and I all scored the event on a 1 to 10 scale and reviewed the pay-per-view and posted that on the VIP site for our VIP members. About MJF, I wrote, MJF needs to move on and sever any reference to the last few years of his career and hit a reset button. His act needs to grow up and get past the low-hanging fruit and crudest zinger of the week approach and build around a more straightforward, aspirational, arrogant, cheating heel persona. I don't know if he read that and then cut his promo tonight based on that, or if it's just he's on the same page as me. But I'm glad that we're on the same page because I thought this was a step in the right direction. He said the Better Than You Bebe chapter of his career has ended. Now it's time for retribution. He said something was taken from him. Then he focused on the title. He said, well, Dictator John, I got a question for you, buddy. What's a king to a god? And he's asserting himself as being a bigger deal than Moxley. Now, is this good when we don't know if Moxley's a heel or a face? Well, he's supposed to be a heel, but fans like him anyway. To have two heels fighting. I mean, there's too much of that going on. It muddies, what I think should be the NHL home versus away rival approach to booking pro wrestling. You want that. You want to have fans give fans reason to and unify behind somebody and against somebody else. And AEW is muddying that up too much. That problem aside, this was, he said, I don't care if if Moxley burns the company to ashes, I want my belt back, come hell or high water. The devil gets his due, part 2. That's what 2025 is for him. This was the reset his character, I think, needed. And I thought the quotes were great. And MJF said, I don't care about AEW. I don't want to rebuild it, burn it down. I just want my belt. That's a selfish, self-centered heel. Now, the practicality of it is, what does a belt matter if you don't have events and crowds and all that? I mean, but let's not overthink that aspect. He's just wrapped up in himself, selfish, and making that clear. So I thought that this is what MJF needed to get 2025 off to a good start. He wasn't going for a crude zinger. There's no low-hanging fruit. There wasn't a quote that's going to end up on social media with people going, oh, that was super clever. It was a guy trying to draw money as a heel and a professional wrestler thinking about winning matches. And I think that should be the foundation of what MJF does. He's just too talented to be doing this shock jock, social media, trying to get whatever. I don't know what's in his head, but it seems like he's just trying to get, trending on social media with some, oh my God, I can't believe he said it stuff. And this felt focused to me, Chris.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really important to kind of, after this meandering feud with Adam Cole, that they both switch heel and face back and forth. And it was one that I think a lot of people were not too enthused to see. It's important for him to move back to kind of how he got to in this prominent position, how people saw him as one of the future stars of wrestling. And this promo was about that. And again, that's kind of why I like this tournament, or not the tournament, the Casino Battle Royal, is it's a 10 pole for people to focus on. The key thing for AEW is, because only one person can win, is how do they make people who do not win interesting. I think there's a way, if MJF's not going to be the one to fight Moxley, they have to find some sort of baby face for him to have just a regular feud with, and not something that goes off the rails or goes into territory that it probably shouldn't.
Back to Zach's email. Copeland, obviously, and then there's Jeff Jarrett. Double J has had a turnaround from being a lead clown in a clown car to a genuinely respected babyface legend. It's not impossible to see him winning the gauntlet match next week, which I definitely didn't think I'd be saying at the beginning of the show. The thing I'm sure Wade liked the most is that they didn't lean too hard on babyfaces being rah-rah AEW, even if the story is still Mox and the mechanics dominating AEW. So the positive spin on Jarrett, spin's the wrong word. It's sincere from Zach. The positive framing is that he has, and this is why I said I don't think Dud and Jay Lethal and they shouldn't have been there. They should have been like the own thing. It's just Jeff carrying himself, and if you can pull it off, more power to you. But pulling yourself off as a bigger legend than you are, and Jarrett's like I said, he's a Carney survivor, and there's a lot people could learn from him, and he's got a lot of good promos and had a lot of good matches for decades. I'm not taking that away from him, but if he can get people to buy into that he's like a legend anywhere near the level of Sting who deserves this kind of TV time, that's fine. I just don't think he's there. And I don't think hanging out with the clowns as an introduction to the generic, 77th version of a fake retirement, it just doesn't feel like that's where AEW should be spending their time. So, even if he's a genuinely respected babyface legend, it's sort of like, well, Billy Gunn gets pops, but he's ruining the Acclaimed. I don't care if he gets pops. He's ruining the Acclaimed. And Jeff Jarrett is taking away TV time that I think he should be a coach backstage, getting other guys to do what he just did, rather than doing it himself.
Yeah, I think it would have been better, since they already announced that he was going to make this announcement, to not have the earlier kind of promo with Karen, Singh, Lethal, and Sanjay. Maybe if you want them to kind of maybe be on the stage when he's done and they like applaud him, just as whatever, that might have been fine, because that only would have been like 5 seconds, as opposed to taking 2 segments. The weird thing about it too, the timing was preceding that, the Jarrett interview in the ring was a Mariah May promo in which she basically was like, "There's no competition for me," and then
in fact, she's number 1, and none of the other women are in the top 10.
Yeah.
How's that possible? Who's 2 through 10 then? Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, but then they're like, they wanted to talk about it, but Jeff Jarrett was coming out with a serious announcement, so they couldn't even mention it, and never got back to it. That's also kind of weird too, where you didn't give that. She's the women's champion. She's been doing pretty well. She's not 53 years old or however old Jeff Jarrett is. Like, let her segment breathe, and then you can move to Jarrett.
Yeah. Jeff Jarrett, by the way, is 57.
57, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Whenever Jeff Jarrett gets brought up, the chat room goes nuts. Standard deviation says Sanjay Dutt came across as a goof, even when he was trying to be serious. I agree with that. I observed that too. Goodfella 1422 says Jeff Jarrett's promo is kind of wholesome. Have Ricochet stab him with scissors next week. LOL. Derek Mitchell says Sting was 64 years old when he retired, hanging out with Darby Allin, while Jeff Jarrett is hanging out with the oddities. Yeah. And Raman says, I don't know if Jeff has Wade's number, but I feel like he might get a call after this, unless Carney isn't as heavy a pejorative as I think it is. It's probably not as heavy as you think it is, Ramen Noodle, in the context that I'm saying it. It is a pejorative, but the roots of wrestling are, and Jeff Jarrett, in a private off-record discussion, is probably going to chuckle at how successful he is at applying Carney techniques in 2025. I don't know that for sure, but my hunch is he'd kind of look at you and wink and go, yeah, look at me. I'm using old school Carney techniques to talk the promoter into giving me TV time, when, my God, look at this locker room full of people who ought to be getting it. It's selfish, but it's a survivor, and he has been a survivor. And he grew up in the business. He talked about it. He knows what to do to get TV time and to charm people and to be, yeah. So anyway, and I don't even think, I think Jeff I think he's a genuinely nice, good person. Like I don't think, when I say Carney, I don't think it's like he has this nefarious means. It's like Hulk Hogan told me once when I interviewed him. He goes, Wade, I just do what I'm paraphrasing here, but I do what every wrestler should be doing. Do and say whatever you have to do in a cutthroat business to get your TV time and your money. He has no allegiance to the business or to others or giving back. He was unabashedly defending self-interested decision-making to make the most money while you can. And that was his view of the business. And so when it's like, why do you lie to the media all the time? He's like, because the media's not going to hold me accountable, and it builds up my star, the image of me with the mainstream. I can say anything and nobody holds me accountable. That matters. And it makes me seem like a bigger star when I make stuff up. I mean, like, again, I'm extrapolating from the code words he used, but that's Carney. It's take advantage of anything you can to get the most TV time and money you can. What does Derek say? Jeff Jarrett's rookie year was in 1986, and Wade, to your point, is a survivor after all these years. It was one of the reasons people moved away from AWA, because Vern Gagne relied on too many old guys. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. Don't get me started, or we'll be here. We can talk about that. Ramen Noodle says, thanks for the breakdown, Wade. That makes a lot of sense. So yeah, pejorative, but not as harsh as it might sound without that kind of context. Beth Back to Zach's email. Ricochet is getting over strong as a heel. The attack on Swerve and Prince Nana was effective. Also, I like Mercedes coming out to gloat. She's good at being super arrogant. It was smart to promo her match with Mina this Sunday. It should be really good, and I suspect she's going to be a triple champion after that match. The more belts you have, the less any of them matter, especially when one is a Rev Pro belt. So Derek sent an email in to go along with the chat I just read, so let me bring it up now, Chris. Hi, Wade and Chris. Happy New Year to both. Just an observation about the number of older wrestlers currently performing in AEW. Jeff Jarrett gave an impassioned promo tonight about his family history in the business, being a 12-time world champion and starting his own promotion in 2002, but was curious what you gentlemen thought about another older wrestler announcing he's going for the AEW world title at 57 years old. He's among a group of almost or over 50-year-olds, and he listed them. Billy Gunn, 61. Jeff Jarrett, 57. Dustin Rhodes, 55. Chris Jericho, 54. Adam Copeland, 52. I think he's 53. Christian Cage, maybe he just turned 50. Christian Cage, 52. Nah, Christian is not. Is Christian 52? I got to look that up.
He's got
51. He's 51. Come on. He's
52 on his next birthday. Unless his birthday was yesterday.
That's the thing. Yeah. Let's see. November 30th, 1973. So he's 51. But am I right? Am I right on Adam Copeland? Let's see. Adam Copeland age. Oh, Adam's only 51. Oh, he's born in 73. That's where I had the 3 in my mind. So yeah. So he added a year on to Copeland and Christian. Shame on you, Derek. You're in the chat. How dare you feed us inaccurate information that we're reading live on the air. Shelton Benjamin, 49. Bobby Lashley, 48. Paul Heyman once said the reason why he had Terry Funk on his roster is you need one older wrestler, but not a roster full of older stars. Just wanted to get your thoughts. By the way, Jeff Jarrett's no Terry Funk. Billy Gunn's no Terry Funk. Dustin Rhodes isn't Terry Funk. Chris Jericho's pretty close, just in terms of stature and stuff. Derek Mitchell just LOL'd us in the chat. Yeah, you laugh.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
Again, I think it's part of it is the issue. Having one is fine, or having a couple in different areas who maybe you don't know how old someone is. But I think the issue to me is just too many all fighting for the same thing. I mean, Chris, and again, a lot of people, the problem is you spend a lot of time on them and not other people. Yeah. If, when you talk about Jeff Jarrett, if he was in a feud with a younger wrestler, getting them over, that was fine. If, Moxley was main competitor with someone who was a bit younger, that was fine. If, Christian's kind of feuding with Hook, I guess that's a bit different. But you have all these old wrestlers, and that's not really what AEW was created for, at least according to them. It's not for that.
Yeah. As Standard Deviation says, only 2 of those names are near the upper half of the card, Copeland and Christian. But yeah, it'd be good to have just one legend at a time and pick Dustin is a guy. I mean, there's stuff Dustin does I don't like. I mean, like tying the legs of he's a baby face and he's tying their legs on the ropes and kicking them in the nuts. And it's just like, there's stuff he does that I'm just like, can we retire that? And can you, have your character mature into the position in the business it's in now and not just, it's like, Jarrett doing Slappy New Year. They're just things that it's time to move on from. They're not things to be all that proud of.
Or Adam Copeland saying Cope saying to Big Bill, your face is stupid, which sounds like something I would hear someone from my daughter's kindergarten class say.
Exactly. Yep. Cope. I mean, he's always needed an editor, and yeah, his judgment on stuff like that isn't good. A lot of times outside. I mean, I don't want to. I hate to defend any aspect of WWE given the culture, that was going on there, but there's a lot of editing that once you see it not happening, you take less for granted, just not having a bunch of Adams running around and a bunch of Cages running around, Brian Cage and Christian Cage and Adam Hangman Page and Adam Cole. And it's just like, there's something to not having a bunch of redundant names and also not having super generic names like Big Bill and Brian Keith. Like this whole thing of pay tribute to the people on the indie scene and the WWE's only out for themselves because they want to own everything. Sometimes your name is bad and you're on national TV, get a better name. Prince was better. Well, Prince was around there. I got caught with that once. But there are rock star names that are better than your given name. Like Elton John. All right.
Yeah. Freddie Mercury,
Yeah. I mean, just like edit, like some curating and editing is good. Not everybody should have free. I mean, this is not script promos. It's not what I'm advocating. People who think it's A or B, and it's just this false choice all the time. But there's something to be said for having a team of people who are respected who go, nah, let's not do that. Okay. JB from Detroit says, if Christopher Daniels is still an AEW official, shouldn't Hangman Page be suspended even longer than before he was after he attacked an official, or potentially even fired? Ken, total no regard. I mean, like, I get if there's like wrestlers are brawling in the crowd, just go, I like the ref having latitude. No one wants to see this end in a count out. I mean, I guess, but just get rid of the damn rule then. Like either enforce it or don't like say, it's like I don't like when referees swallow their whistles in games. It's like the rules are there for a reason. It's to reward talented people and rewarding good defense. You want to have good, solid defense, but not cheating defense. And that's what rules are there for. It's to keep people from cheating to get a leg up that offsets actual skill. And I think when you have that, yeah.
I'm sorry, what is Chris Daniels' actual role on TV? Because he was an interim EVP, but he said he's no longer when Omega came out. So why did he run out with
what is and who replaced Cody? Like, do there need to be 4 EVPs, or was 4 too many? So they thought 3 was a magic number. And then when Kenny was gone, we needed a third one, but it was only interim, kind of like an interim UFC heavyweight champion. Like, so much stuff doesn't make sense that AEW does. And I just put 10 seconds of thought into it and go, like, let's clean this up or not do it in the first place. JB says, on a positive note, I thought pairing Hangman against OC was a wise decision. The Hangman beatdown of OC after the match elicited the appropriate reaction of boos. Orange Cassidy's the ultimate face in that he always gets his opponents booed rather than allowing them to be cool heels. Hangman needs to be heel now. Like, no more shades of gray ambiguity. He's a dick. He's a jerk. He's like, come on. Like, let's put him only against baby faces now. Number 3. Yeah. When and if the Acclaimed eventually break up, I assume Castro will be the heel and Bones be the face. I think both guys have potential to be greater than the sum of their parts rather than the whole in terms of the potential future singles run. I was higher on both those guys 3 years ago than I am now, Chris.
I think part of it again is the booking of how they were. They got themselves over, and I don't know if AEW, maybe they didn't want them to get over. They weren't planning to get over, so they didn't really go with it as much as they could. And again, I think part of the problems in this match, Castro was clearly the heel going into the match. I thought at one point, maybe this is my head thinking too much, that because Bowens kind of held his own in the ring, that more than Castro, that maybe the Hurt Syndicate actually would have wanted him to be in the group because he did better based on the match. That probably involves a bit more thought than what AEW did. But then Bowens left Castro by himself to basically get beat up to a cheered Hurt Syndicate. So that wasn't actually a babyface move. Mm-hmm. I just don't like, part of it is, what are they presenting to elicit a response? I mean, people talk about all the time. They even had a meme for 2025, the Rockers breaking up with Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels. But the point of that was, it was built over weeks and weeks and weeks leading up to that interview. You remember the last part, but the reason why you remember it is because of all the time put into it. The Acclaimed breakup could mean something. It could be a possibility, trying to be as positive as possible, but you have to build it up right to make people want to care about them after they break up. Now it's like, I don't know who to root for because both of them seem unlikable.
Yeah, exactly. Joe in the chat says, Wade, do you still think Bowens is a blue chip prospect? I remember you would consistently call him the excellence of execution. Yeah, he was the, what was his own nickname for himself? The pocket knife thing. I can't think of it now. It's long night. The 5-tool player, something. Whatever. He had his own kind of version of that. I don't think he's where he was. I've lost some faith in his judgment, his own career management. I think the scissors stuff turned him into a cartoon character. I think worshiping at the altar of Billy Gunn as this like vaunted veteran when he was not. Sorry, it just wasn't. He was the lesser half of a tag team and a failed singles wrestler, and was super selfish in everything he did in AEW, under the guise and veneer of putting other people over, because he again got away with inflating his own stature. to get TV time. And yeah, I think Caster with that weird MJF stalking thing, that was some in-joke that never got explained on TV or finished or concluded. And then Bowens, he's still really good in the ring, but you know what? He's 5 years older than he was when he was the excellence of execution. And now he's in his mid-30s and he's just clowned around for 5 years. I think his career's been badly mismanaged. And I think Caster has gone from a cool guy to kind of a weirdo. So the core talent is still there with both guys, but it would take some rehabilitation. I would still probably vote for doing it over some of the other people they're pushing. I think there's more upside in Bowens and Caster than there is in Kyle O'Reilly and Roderick Strong and Taven and Bennett right now. But damn, it's such a shame. I mean, they got their merch checks, I hope, and maybe they're set for life because of that, and so it doesn't matter. But not San Francisco Niners fan said Swiss Army knife. I don't think that was exactly it, but it's closer than whatever I butchered.
Yeah, I think that feud with MJF, or not that feud, because they ended up teaming with MJF, I think, for a while when Cole got injured. I think that took the cool factor away from them. Even though they had, again, part of the problem is they had lost the title and they never really got it back, or they weren't able to, be in the mix because AEW doesn't really have a tag team division as much as people thought they would, which is a separate issue. So if you don't have the belt, you kind of flounder anyway. But they kind of were still over, but they did that weird thing with MJF where it's like, okay, you guys have, you may not be the champion, but we still think you're cool, but now you're doing we don't even know what you're doing. So I think that really hurt them and they haven't really recovered.
Standard Deviation says, Billy Gunn piggybacked on the most over-young tag team in the company and then acted like he was the cause of it. Yeah, they're not a better spot because of him. Again, maybe the merch money, they got those crowd pops as attendance went down. They got crowd pops for doing mid-card shtick. But man. All right, back to JB's email. Where did I? Oh yeah, I think that putting Julia Hart over Jamie Hayter was very telling on where AEW currently sees the two. I have a thought on that. Upon a return from the significant back injury, Jamie Hayter would have been pushed to the top of the women's division where she once sat. After tonight, I see AEW giving Julia Hart the position that was planned for Hayter. What do you think, Chris, in terms of the choice between those two? I'm still high on Jamie Hayter. I know people are trying to figure out what her shtick is, and her, is she going for, pre the man Becky Lynch? But I get pushing Julia Hart too, and you got to have, you should have winners and losers. What do you think?
I think you had Mariah May cutting these promos that she didn't have any contenders. You had Jamie Hayter return a few months ago at this point, who is a former AEW Women's Champion. You could have built her up as someone who could have wrestled Mariah May. It was like, I was a champion once, and I was injured. I was coming back, but I think having her in this feud with Julia Hart kind of put her in the background. I think they're two people because they were both. This again is like a booking thing. Because they were both out for a while, they should have put them against other people instead of putting them against each other. I think you would have, who else, we could maybe think about who that would have been, but I think that would have been better for both of them as opposed to they're both new, or not they're both new, they're both returning after long absences. So one of them is going to be kind of in the background. And for now, that's Jamie Hayter. I think she has more upside than Julia. Julia's more of like a character, though I think she's good as well. But I just don't think it made sense at this point to book them against each other.
On a kind of serious storyline note regarding the world title, JB wants to know, does Jay White earn his one-on-one title shot against Mox in 2 weeks by winning next week's Casino Gauntlet? Tonight's episode certainly seemed to foreshadow that being the case. I think they did a good job making you think it could be a few people. I wish they did even more to make us think it could be even more people with little soundbite promos from different people talking about how they're going to be in that Gauntlet match. But yeah, do you have a prediction on what that one-on-one match is? Who is the challenger?
I hope it's Cope actually to get that out of the way, but I think it's going to end. I think he's going to be on the pay-per-view. So my guess is going to be Jay White. Yeah.
All right. I'm not really a fan of stabbing with scissors, but I do find myself enjoying this unhinged version of Ricochet. I've really only ever seen him portrayed as a boring babyface with no personality, who's an exciting in-ring wrestler. He finally has a character, and I'm finally excited to see where it goes, for better or worse. In the chat, Goodfella 1422 said Swerve really gave Ricochet the birth of a comic book anime villain arc. Ricochet has to do the character work now. How you feeling, Chris, about Ricochet? We didn't get the haha. I can't do it with my hoarse voice. I couldn't do it otherwise either if I could do it a little closer. But what do you think of where Ricochet is and his character work?
I thought a few weeks ago that was one of the worst portrayals of someone that, especially that they invest a lot of money and time in, with the way he was kind of pushed aside by the Hurt Syndicate. And I think in a way the chat made a really good point. This is kind of like a comic book villain arc story. But again, the real key is how they follow up with it. I thought now again, continuity. The commentators mentioned it's a no disqualification match, but luckily for Ricochet, Swerve happened to be going into the corner that he was in, because that's where Jay White and Roderick Strong just happened to be. So again, it's a no disqualification match. He could have just run in there, done it anyway. But putting that aside, I like the fact that he's showing a different edge to his character. But really, what AEW has to do, they have to follow up with it. And if this is the way he is now, can he be that way when he's not wrestling Swerve? Which eventually he won't be wrestling Swerve, and that's where you need to see whether it pays off or not.
Yeah, you want to have characters that aren't completely dependent on the feud you're in, and it doesn't translate afterwards. And I think sometimes we see that with characters where it's like, well, this fits exactly what you're doing right now, but have you thought beyond it? But I'm enjoying seeing Ricochet have a personality. It sounds negative when I say that, but he just hasn't had a distinctive personality before. And I think he's effective as a heel. I think he's getting a chance to see if he can, get a reaction from a crowd emotionally invested in him that isn't just based upon him doing high spots, because in AEW that doesn't stand out as much. That was going to be the problem. But yeah, this is something I hope a lot of thought is put into it, and I hope it's not, everybody just finding a way to bludgeon and bloody their opponents as a way to get heel heat. I'd rather have something, MJF. So many wrestlers are using just ultra violent tactics in sort of a hacky way that has diminishing returns, and I'd rather Ricochet get under people's skin in other ways than the visual of just massive blood and beatdowns. AEW just kind of has the thing they do, and everybody just kind of does the same thing, and I think people get kind of numb to it after a ways. But I think there's something here to build on. I'm guardedly optimistic that Ricochet is going to be entertaining in this role, and beyond even the next month or two. Okay. He says, not sure that I would give it its own segment on named Dynamite, but I actually did enjoy the content and delivery of Jeff Jarrett addressing his future. Also, not necessarily advocating for a Double J title run, but if he's going to get a shot at it, I'd rather be him stringing together a few big consecutive wins rather than winning an arbitrary casino gauntlet. Absolutely. Well, when I say absolutely, that's a better way to earn a title shot. I don't know if I want to see Jeff Jarrett getting statement wins on TV. That could exacerbate a point that we're making. Maybe with Jarrett, it is best to have it be sort of a fluky gauntlet win instead of him actually getting wins over actual contenders. Because if you just get wins over non-contenders, that doesn't help either. I don't think Danny Garcia or Jack Perry should be losing to Jeff Jarrett to help get him over right now to earn a title shot. So
it would be better that he somehow lucked his way into it in this type of match, and use that as like, oh, this is a sign that I got one last shot in me, and that would be better than beating 3 or 4 people that you probably need to protect or push better.
Yeah. Cope is really pulling out all the stops upon his return, the Death Riders on Dynamite, and then the Learning Tree on Collision. Do you think that Cope calling Big Bill's face stupid was an inside joke at the fact that a lot of people have said Cope and Bill look alike? Probably. I don't know if inside... Well, Chris, go, yeah.
This is the problem with AEW. It's like, maybe it was, but I'm watching the show, and my first thought of this is something that would be said at the playground at my daughter's elementary school, and that's not what you want from one of your lead baby faces in the main event. And also the weird part is, why are they cutting a promo next to them as they're about to go out for their match? Why?
Yes.
These promos in the back pre-taped, but you had to cut this promo or interview Learning Tree 5 feet from them. You couldn't do it somewhere else. And
this idea of, it's like the Caster MJF stalking thing that was built around some online in-joke. If that's an in-joke, that's fine. Like, that was my criticism of Don Callis on commentary. People loved his commentary. In Japan, it was like, and other places, I'm like, it always just sounds like he's trying to pop the boys in the back watching on the monitor. Like, get the product over, get the match over. Don't try to, oh, I just said that, and now people in the back are laughing. And when I get backstage, they're going to give me a standing ovation for that. I can't believe I said that. Like, it just felt like self-indulgent and self-serving and clubhouse humory. And I just don't think that's how you draw money. And Cal's a whole other issue. And I think there's a lot you can do with him, but he's another guy who needs editing. You need to take his talent and point it in the right. It's like the cat's wandering in a bad direction. You pick him up and point him 90 degrees and they just walk the new direction. Like, sometimes you've got to point people in the right direction. And I thought a lot of the praise for Callis was based on people going, hey, he's talking to me because I'm an insider fan and I get the reference. And it's like, that doesn't translate to national cable. All right. Second to finally, we now have MJF, Cope, Christian, Double J, all 4 competitors in last Sunday's Fatal 4-Way title match, and everyone participating in next week's Casino Gauntlet, having stated a claim at Mox's title in one way or the other. I love having multiple title challengers at once, but is this too much? That's my thoughts too. Like, I want everyone to want the world title, but sometimes it can be distracting, Chris. If now it's always a challenge. You want everyone to want the world title, especially when you have all kinds of titles. You want to make it clear that there's one title that means more than anything. But if you're talking about matches that aren't happening yet, that are more interesting than the ones that you're actually going to deliver, that can be a problem. I think people are like, oh, MJF's back in the title picture. Maybe they want to see that more than Jeff Jarrett, or maybe they want to see that more than Christian cashing in, or Jay White for that matter, who's got this sort of ambivalence from the crowd because he's not a well-defined character.
Yeah, well, everyone is talking about the world title, not Kenny Omega. He's not, but or maybe that's why he's coming back next week. He's gonna start the show with like, I want to be in the casino battle royal. I don't care about Okada. I think this is kind of the issue with AEW. I think it's fine for 1 week to set up the importance of this match. The issue is, one person will win and wrestle Moxley. What happens to the other 20 or 18 or however may end up in the match? All these other wrestlers have stated that their intention it's like the Royal Rumble. When the Royal Rumble was really booked really well back in the day, I still remember the 91 Royal Rumble where Macho Man never showed up because he attacked Ultimate Warrior during his match with Sergeant Slaughter, and you were wondering who was going to come out or how many feuds were developed based on that match. I think the key for AEW is on next week's show. One person will win, will wrestle Moxley, put them aside. Can you maintain 2 or 3 other feuds for wrestlers who, yes, their stated goal is the AEW world title, but they have something else to distract them right now that they'll take their focus away before they get back to that.
By the way, Derek Mitchell just says Ricochet's laugh is from the rapper Jadakiss. Yep. Yeah. And then Goodfella 1472 says Ricochet was so punked out. This has to be the way to back out of it. Anyway, let's see here. Okay, this is I don't have a voice for this. It's a long email, but I'm gonna pull a couple highlights out of this. This is from D. Tobias Denny. I apologize for not reading the whole thing. If the show wasn't so long and my voice wasn't, I'm not killing. I'm just like killing it tonight in the negative way. Vocally here, I'm talking too much. But he goes, I'm waiting crew, Happy New Year. I'm writing in regards to AEW's event tonight, taking place less than 10 minutes from my house. I've been a devout listener to your family of podcasts for 6 years now, and I support you monthly through Patreon. Thank you. Appreciate that. I've been to many live pro wrestling shows in this time as well. I became a pro wrestling fan again about 8 years ago. I'm 46, and I grew up watching WWF and WCW. I lapsed after the Attitude Era. When AEW was announced, I was extremely hopeful and excited to be part of a fan base from the inception of the promotion. I bought all the early pay-per-views and would routinely travel to Charlotte, Greenville, and Atlanta to catch Dynamite and Collision whenever they rolled through. I was in Greensboro for Revolution and Charlotte for the first Battle of the Belts. I, like many others, have been steadily losing interest in AEW the last 2 years. I still watch Dynamite, but mainly to enjoy your post-show analysis from you and your team. I will list all the reasons, but my interest has waned as you cover them, and I believe you are spot on with your criticisms. Then he talks about Dynamite had a chance to win him over some affordable tickets, and that didn't end up happening. He said that when a promotion comes to town for a fan who spent thousands of dollars, and I can't drive 10 minutes, that really says something. I hope they can turn things around and have a good effect on the industry as a whole. He says, I drove 7 hours round trip to see a TNA house show in Atlanta 3 weeks ago. So he's not done traveling or going to shows. He's not like a lapsed fan. Every match on that card had me wanting to be part of the live experience. I wish I could say the same for tonight. If things change and I do end up going, I'll let you know. But I thought you'd like to hear from a pro wrestling super fan who's been let down by what AEW has become. Thanks for what you and your team do. But yeah, he listed, the lineup just didn't entice him. He listed the advertised matches and said he thought they would stack the show as a first Max streaming show. And he said it defies logic because nothing gets restless, but he said the matches just aren't enticing. So, it's an anecdote from one person, but it matches the fact that they're running smaller buildings. Good for them that they, approach that there were not, 3,800 people, give or take, tonight, Chris. That's good, but there are people upset by ticket prices, and also you just don't know who you're going to get when you go to an AEW show. Are you going to get Kenny or not? Are you going to get MJF in person or not? You don't know what you're getting when you buy a ticket.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. I mentioned, I think the last time I was with you, we covered, kind of maybe in Raw, Justin and I went to a collision taping in September in Dayton. It was on a Thursday night, and we actually looked at the flyer, and there were maybe only 2 wrestlers. I think FTR were the only wrestlers on the flyer that were on the show, and I was, pulling up, driving to the arena, and we only had 1 match announced for the show. I thought that was a really bad sign, and coincidentally, they had trouble drawing in Columbus. Columbus is where they were supposed to be in Nationwide Arena, where the Blue Jackets play, and they had to pull out, and they ended up going into GalaxyCon at the convention center down the road, which I had a colleague of mine from work actually went to the show, talked to about it. He enjoyed it. He actually was able to go to the GalaxyCon with his girlfriend, but again, a smaller venue. And to me, the issue with AEW is 5 years of national television. How are smaller venues a win? How is that actually good with all the exposure? I mean, again, Justin and I cover independent wrestling. A lot of wrestling that we talked about today, one of the issues with a lot of independent wrestling shows, I think a lot of the callers would like, is accessibility. They're behind these streaming services people don't have. AEW doesn't have that problem. They were able to run shows in stadiums and large arenas all around the world. So to me, they have to go back to building stars and having television that people are really into. After 5 years, to me, running smaller business is not something that they should be proud of.
It's the give and take. When we go 2.5 hours, my dog gets impatient and I have to give him attention. So you 2 people get to see my dog on camera right now, pleading with me to sign off and give him attention. The big crowd, the big arena is a problem because you have this big echoey building, Chris, and a bunch of empty seats, and it's super dark, and there's a negative to that. But then there's the negative to being in a clearly small building when Tony Schiavone can go, this building was around in 1964, it's been around forever, and you can tell it doesn't have the ribbon lighting, and it's kind of a home of an indie show. There's a trade-off for both options, but the no question what you want is run the major NBA and NHL arenas and sell them out, or have 8 to 10,000 or 12,000 people there like WWE's doing. But the question is, what's worse, being in a major arena and having a bunch of empty seats, or being in a small arena that's packed and looking like you turn people away and there's an intimacy that leads to more energy? I like the smaller venue with the intimacy and more energy more, but I think mixing it up is probably important so it doesn't just seem like you're only touring small markets and small arenas. But ultimately, it's not a victory if you have to run smaller buildings in order to avoid the big empty cavernous vibe.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see where they've announced they made a big announcement of their shows the first quarter of 2025. And a lot of them are in, with a few exceptions, a lot of them are in like Jim Crockett territory. Yeah. A lot of them are in this. I mean, there's one in LA and there may be one somewhere else in the Midwest, but there are a lot of them. I know they're coming to Cincinnati, which was they had to move out of Louisville. They're coming to Cincinnati for the Maximum Carnage, I believe it's called. But a lot of them are like, my goodness, I'm having flashbacks to Jim Crockett, 87. Some of the cities that they're going to be, I think they're going to be in Huntsville and, I think Clarksville, Tennessee. And yeah, I feel like, we are in 80s Jim Crockett, Mid-South. Jerry Jarrett, maybe that's why Jeff Jarrett's talking, because
these are some of the buildings TNA started touring when Hulk Hogan said, in order to increase ratings, we need to get out of this studio and start running in buildings. And then they went to these buildings and broke Panda Energy's budget, losing money every other week, and with all the travel expenses. There's a lot of history to these buildings, and it's a mixed history. It's nice to tip a hat and talk about the great things that have happened in some of those buildings, but WWE is just lapping them when it comes to looking major league right now. Final email from Chris Johnson. Comes from Chris Johnson. I'm going to try to only get positives. I thought the records were going to be reset. They weren't. Orange and Hangman was fine. MVP still asking for fans to cheer the Hurt Syndicate during the ring entrance. What's up with that? I agree. I liked Max Caster's story that they told. By the way, they screwed up a spot in the match. Did you pick up on that, Chris? Remember when Caster ran the ropes and he kind of stopped? And you're like, what was that for? And then the next spot.
Yeah, Caster was supposed to tag Bowens because he was awkwardly ran the ropes and he did it again for the blind tag.
Oops. I don't know if Caster missed his spot or Bowens went to that spot too soon, but and Shelton's just standing there with his back turned going, what's going on? Julia Hart's entrance is still cool, but the crowd is dead during the match. It was rough to watch. I guess 2025 would be more the same with wrestlers bragging about how high their matches rank. Okay, I was trying to keep it positive. I'd hope the new year bring changes, but then Ricochet attacks Swerve with scissors. When my wife happens to catch the wrestling on TV, she sometimes gets interested and asks questions. Tonight, she looked into the den for the dining room where she was eating and looked at all the blood and got disgusted and asked me to turn it off. One data point for sure. It's only one data point, but this isn't going to attract new fans or put butts in seats. I love Hook on the Stoop promos. Powerhouse Hobbs looked awesome. I'd love to see a sustained push. MGS promo was confusing, and I liked it, but more than anything, I'm glad we're moving forward. Happy New Year to everyone. Do you like Hobbs winning a squash match as a way to build up him wanting to win the gauntlet match and get a title shot?
I did. I just wish that he also had an inset promo.
Yep.
And also, it's kind of weird, too. He wrestled Takeshi at the pay-per-view. Takeshi won, and he doesn't want the title. He's not mentioned at all on the show. But the guy that lost is the one that's getting a push. Which, again, I like Hobbs. He's one of the wrestlers I feel like hasn't been utilized properly. But they should have definitely, because now he doesn't have a manager, definitely could have used maybe even because, again, the Dynamite is weird. They have all these supposed main matches, and they just kind of throw him out there in a 2-on-1 match, which doesn't make sense. So maybe they should have explained why, and he could just say he's using it to get ready for the gauntlet match next week.
In the chat, by the way, just to round out the show here, there was some thought on how the 1980s is not. You can have a cool song from the 1980s, like WWF Saturday's Main Event in the mid 80s had Obsession, and that worked for that. So, as Derek Mitchell's one who pointed it out, I'm so excited. The Scissor Sisters is not cool. Obsession, the theme of Saturday's Main Events, is an old song, but it's cool and iconic. So some of this just does come kind of. I had started that, wanted to bring it back up again. It's not just the decade. Is a song timeless, and does it fit the mood of the show that you're trying to set on at the start of the show?
And also, is that the song that you want for people who may be watching AEW for the first time?
Yeah, I'm so excited, and I just can't hide it. Oh yeah, I mean, really? That's how you get people excited. I mean. I don't think there's a defense of that being the entrance of the entrance theme. I don't think there's a defense for it. You have the budget to buy licensed music, and in 2025, that's what you go with. I can get the name of a rapper wrong, but I'm also not going to be picking like it. Yeah. Tony Khan needs to just expand his circle and like talk this stuff through. I'd be curious what the genesis of that was. Edward Sladex says, does the song point to a larger issue that they have no identity? Positives for a known song, but it's also identified with something else. Maybe something original would be better. Well, definitely something original could be better. I mean, some of the best theme songs ever were original songs. Just growing up, I mean, there were a lot of like WCW had some cool original songs. WWF Raw, the original one, and then the follow-up, both were really cool. They were original. I would be fine with that over a bad judgment call. I think problem with Tony Khan, they use November Rain for their last or November pay-per-view, which again is like that's what ECW did, again when I was in high school. I think Tony Khan, again, he loves the fact that he can pay for these songs. But again, the placement of that, I don't want to badmouth I love the Pointer Sisters. I want to make that very clear. Shout out to them. But again, just that's not the song to set the energy for a wrestling song. For wrestling show. Exactly. All right. We will end there. Chris, unless there's anything else you want to sneak in from your notes or your thoughts.
One thing quickly, I know that you're behind, but I have you to mention it. Did you happen to catch the last game between the Knicks and the Timberwolves?
Yes, I was there. That's why my voice is hoarse. That's where I caught my cold.
Oh, okay.
I've been sick since like 36 hours later. I started getting sick.
Did Julius Randle get out of there before you, or did you?
the dysfunction on the Wolves is the national portrayal of what's going on with the Wolves is very inaccurate compared to the beat writers who are on the scene. This team loves each other, and they really are trying to figure it out. And a lot of people read body language wrong, and I think there's some people frustrated with some hero ball, but that's being addressed internally. But honestly, this is a team that, from people who have been around the Wolves for decades, say this team really likes each other, and they talk. And they there was an article the local beat writer of the Star Tribune did about how they do group texts, and they vent and they talk to each other and they work things out. And if you watch them during warmups, they are genuinely laughing. And people who even you see having issues on the court, or what you perceived as issues on the court, or whatever, like in warmups the next game, they are joshing around with each other and having a great time. And I'm not particularly worried about the team. I mean, they took Oklahoma City to the limit last night. And then, there were just some easily correctable errors. There's a lot of talent on this team, but it is a very different team with Julius Randle compared to Cat. But DiVincenzo has woken up. They figured out how to play him, and he's turning into a leader. And they're 2.5 games out of the 4th position in the West. I mean, they are right. They finished third. They finished number 3 last year by 1 game, because their last game of the season they played a team trying to win in Phoenix. Whereas OKC and Denver were playing teams who were trying to move up in the lottery, so they didn't even try. They were basically tied for the number 1 spot. But they're 2.5 games out of the number 4 spot, despite all this early dysfunction trying to figure out a total new team chemistry.
Yeah, Julius Randle's one of these people. A lot of it applies to wrestling too, where he's a bad body language person.
Yep.
His body language is always bad. But if you read about Julius Randle, about how his teammates, even with the Knicks, when they made their big trade for OG Anunoby, Emmanuel quickly talked about how much he still talked to Randle, how much of a leader he was. He's just one of these people that if you don't know him, you see him on the court, he mopes around a bit. It's almost like he has what they call job face in wrestling.
Yes.
Very well. The only interesting thing for me with Karl Anthony Towns is he's played a lot better than I thought. He's like leading the league in rebounding, or he was. He's up there. I didn't realize until that game how much of I assumed obviously he was there a long time. He's a good guy, but how much of a fixture he was in the Twin Cities, and as well as he apparently, I assumed he wanted to be happy. I think he's happy to come to the Knicks, but there was an element of him that felt blindsided by the trade, and that I wasn't really aware of even as a Knicks fan.
Karl Anthony Towns is a sweet, sweet guy. He was one of the most, he's maybe the most frustrating max player the Wolves have ever had, because there was a term, stray voltage with him that was coined, because anytime that he drove to the basket and got touched by a defender, his arms would flail and he would make this whole production. He'd fall down all the time when he was just grazed. And it just got to be unpleasant to watch. It's like, grow up. You don't every time. And I know a lot of star players do it. Kevin Durant does it. So many others just complain to the ref constantly, but he would complain to the ref and not run back on defense. He's greatly misunderstood. Some people only know what Charles Barkley knows, which is nothing about Cat, because you have to watch the Timberwolves if you want to make smart commentary on them. But Cat is a phenomenal 3-point shooter. And he was playing a very different game with Rudy Gobert because he had to, and it worked. We were then basically tied for the number 1 team in the West last year. And if Ant hadn't fallen and hurt his tailbone, and then his shooting percentage dropped 20%, we might have beat Dallas. We were competitive in those games. And it's, again, nobody pays attention to it, but Cat landed on his tailbone and didn't get up for 5 minutes, and his shooting percentage dropped 20%. And we couldn't compete with Dallas anymore after that. But we were very close to getting to the finals. With Cat and Gobert as co-twin towers, he's playing a completely different game now with a completely different team. I'm not surprised at all he's doing this well, and he's one of those players you're happy for. The question is, when the playoffs come up, is he going to play great 1 game and then disappear for 2, which is what happened here. And so between the complaining to the refs, not running back on defense, and being inconsistent in big moments, that's a problem. But he's a underrated defender too. He did really well against Denver and Dallas last year. So I'm glad he's in the East because I can root for him. I'm rooting for the Knicks. I mean, Celtics and Cleveland, they're fun to cheer for too, honestly. I don't hate the team. I wish I did. I don't hate the teams in the East, but Cat's a good dude. But I'm glad what you said about Julius Randle, because that is totally, we're all adjusting to his body language, his facial expressions, and it just seems like he doesn't want to be here. And DiVincenzo gave off those vibes too. And it's like they won 3 of their last 4 games. The only game they lost is to the best team in the league, OKC, arguably. I mean, they've won 12 in a row now, and we were ahead by 5. We were ahead by 12 in the third quarter. I mean, so and just some dumb mistakes that are easily correctable. So they're not going to be. Someone in the chat said they're going to be a play-in team. They're not. They're going to leapfrog 3 or 4 of these teams. They're way too much talent if they stay healthy.
It's a long season, only halfway through, and again, the NBA
not even one third.
Oh, it was more than that. Well, the NBA is also a matchup league, so
yes,
you can't write them off. They may get good matchups in the playoffs. I mean, the one thing for me with the Knicks, they don't match up well against the Celtics, but they match up well against conceivably everyone else. And the only thing I am worried about Cat is in New York, how the New York media can be if something happens in a big playoff game. What'll happen? But he's been playing so well so far. And honestly, and we'll wrap up. I know it's getting late. The issue really is obviously the Timberwolves didn't want to pay him $61 million in 2 years. So,
well, that's the thing. You can't have a take on the Wolves without actually doing some homework on this, because the Wolves would have loved to have kept Cat, and they did not make that trade to become a better team. They made the trade because they thought Cat's trade value was at its peak, and if they kept Cat, they would have lost 3 players they love who they think collectively are better than Cat. They would have lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Naz Reid, and one other key player in order to keep him. And we would have been that super top-heavy team with no bench. And Naz Reid was 6th man of the year last year. And it's a fight between him and Julius Randle for time. Like against OKC, Naz was on the court and Reid wasn't. And we could have used Randle, and we could have used Randle scoring. I mean, he's a guy who just turns his back to the basket, and he's going to score a 3 or a short range, a mid-range 2, or go right to the basket. He's a real versatile offensive player. But there's drawbacks to him too, and there's a reason Naz is in there. But literally, the Wolves had to make a choice, and it isn't the trade we made. It was what we would have lost in being unable to pay these contracts. Yes, it was, what do they call it? The double cap, or there's
double
some
apron, the way they changed the cap.
The second apron penalty. That was an absolute factor. But if they thought they could win an NBA title the next 2 years, they would have paid it and kept him. But Anthony Edwards is quite a bit younger than Cat, and I don't know, 6-7 years younger. They made a trade so the Wolves could compete with OKC more than Denver. The Cat and Gobert were paired together by our GM to compete with Denver. Yeah, to beat Denver. But now the calculation was, no, we got to compete with OKC, youngest team in the league. They're going to be great for 6 years. How can the Wolves with Anthony Edwards be great for 6 years? You trade away a player who's at peak trade value, who's aging out, who has good years left. He could have 4 good years left, but you have a young core, and Naz and Alexander Walker. They're the ones that are going to be there competing with OKC. Jaden, in 3-4 years, they're the guys who are actually going to be able to compete with OKC. So there's so much more to this than, oh, look, the Knicks have 4 more wins than the Wolves, so the Wolves lost the trade. It's like, that's so simple-minded, and like, don't talk about the NBA, or at least don't talk about the Wolves if you don't know more than that. And that's basically all the East Coast media.
Yeah, it's also the Knicks have had a really good record when their best starts, and the Wolves started off slow. But again, we'll see. I mean, and I think part of it was just the optics of that game. I mean, Cat was. Yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible. It was, the Knicks were basically celebrating on. I mean, the Knicks were basically doing like end zone celebrations off. And also the Wolves' effort that was really bad that day. The Knicks had so many wide open threes. The coach seemed to be like he would have punched the wall if he could. The T-Wolves coach. He looked very angry. He's like frustratingly even-tempered. Like, he doesn't react. I'm ready to like throw stuff out the window, and he's just standing there looking like you say, kind of built up angst, but he just like waits it out. He's a very and the players like him for that, because he doesn't go bonkers. There's some coaches like the Knicks coach who go bonkers over stuff, and he's very, very zen, but almost to a fault. Ramen Noodle says, Wade, in hindsight, do you still like acquiring Gobert? Seems like his money caused all this.
Yeah, because we were the best team in the Western Conference almost the entire year last year, and we're Anthony Edwards not falling on his tailbone. That away from going to the finals, it worked. I mean, Cat and Gobert worked, and people were, snidely, cynically unaware of smart people deciding it would work. It took a year, and Cat missed most of one season, but when he was healthy for most of a season, it worked. We were the number one defensive team in the league and went to the conference finals. And we'd be a great team right now with him. And we're one of the top defensive teams over the past 20 games.
And I also believe if the Wolves weren't constructed the way that they did, the Nuggets win the title last year.
There you go. Yes.
They're the only team that would have beaten the Nuggets. I think the Nuggets would have beat the Mavericks and the Celtics. Yep.
Well, I don't know about Denver and Celtics. I don't know. I mean, the Celtics I'm not ruling it out. I just don't think it's a given, because that Denver team had some issues that the Wolves exposed. But I think the Wolves were built to eliminate Denver, and they did. Now they're being built to be the top team in the West with Oklahoma City for the next 5 years, and maybe 6 or 7 during Ant's peak. That's what that trade was about. It wasn't just about saving money. It wasn't giving up on something that was working because they knew it was working. It's about Anthony Edwards having a young team that will grow with him and surround and be great. My answer to the question is, yeah, I like the Gobert trade. I mean, we're still such a good defensive team. And it's like you said, Chris, it's about matchups. Sometimes Gobert plays a lot, and other times he plays a lot and shouldn't, because it's not a good matchup for him. But it's been a joy watching somebody who's that he's a goof. He's a goof. He's a goof, like, personality wise, but he's also really sophisticated and smart in other ways off court. And he wants to be an offensive juggernaut, and he's not, and that's frustrating because he puts up shots he shouldn't be. But I think a lot of players are better because they're his teammate, and that'll carry on. So I'm not like, there's every January I want to just stop watching the Wolves. I'm not like a total homer apologist, but I'm not down on this team right now. And they played OKC really, really competitively last night. And there's still bench players who aren't getting time who are good. So anyway, cool. I'm seeing if the chat had any closing words. Nope. All right. Thanks, everybody. Go VIP. If you're not a VIP member and you like the way, as I say, if you like the way we approach wrestling coverage, the way to show that is doing what you're doing, watching us, or listening to us, watching us on YouTube. But another way is financially. We survive on our VIP membership, and it's not charity. You get a lot in return for your money. Full details on all the perks that come with VIP membership, PWTorch.com/GoVIP. PWTorch.com/GoVIP. We run 18 years ago podcasts throughout the week, Wade Keller hotlines with tons of insider information, backstage news on the rise of John Cena and Batista and everything going on at TNA. We've got great new shows every week that are VIP exclusive, our post-pay-per-view roundtables that I host, so much more. Just check out our page, pwtorch.com/GoVIP. Try us free for 7 days on Spotify or Patreon. Just search PWTorch VIP in Patreon or Spotify, and you can get a 7-day free trial. And you can get a full VIP membership and unlock our full library with other membership tiers. Yeah, we appreciate your support. Start off the new year. Give yourself a gift of a 1 month or 1 year membership. PWTorch.com/GoVIP. Thanks, everybody. And if I have a voice, we will talk to you Friday night.